across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This
Good morning and welcome to Morning Glory. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 6. I'm Mike Graham and we are here, of course, for the duration of the next 4 hours. A beautiful day appears to be upon us. The sun may not come out. It may not, in fact, be in any way gorgeous. However, the temperature has risen by about 7 or 8 degrees. So already, if you're getting ready to go out the door and take your children somewhere rather than school because it's half term, just make sure that you're not overdressed because it is rather pleasant. Now, out there in the big wide world, however, I have to say I've been slightly taken aback by the absolute and utter reverence with which people are giving Donald Trump's remarks, with the absolute and utter horror show that the reaction to his remarks is, and how everybody's getting their knickers in a collective twist, you know, from here to Brussels to Bonn to all sorts of other parts of the world. You know, Donald Trump is doing what Donald Trump does. The front pages are all completely full of him, which I'm sure he'll be very happy about. Zelensky is no dictator, Starmer tells Trump. To Ukraine with love, says the Daily Mirror, who are very sure that we're going to send yet another £4.5 billion to Ukraine, even though we don't have it. Trump appalls world with dictator blast at Zelensky, says the Daily Mail. Trump deepens rift with Ukraine by labelling Zelensky a dictator, says the Guardian. Trump attacks dictator Zelensky, says the Telegraph. Well, he would do that, wouldn't he? Nobody's quite sure exactly what Trump is up to. Nobody knows exactly where these peace talks will end. Certainly there's been noises coming out of the White House in the past 24 hours that, of course, Ukraine will be part of any conversation that goes on. But I'm more interested, really, in the reaction to the governments of the West, and particularly Western Europe, who seem to have been running Western Europe into the ground, who have been having ridiculous kind of conversations about migration, allowing thousands upon thousands of people to come into their countries, millions, in fact, over the course of the last 10 years, and allowing their countries to have lost all faith in defending their own nations. And that's why Donald Trump is doing what he's doing, and we will explore exactly what good that will do. People seem to be completely and utterly discombobulated and not sure what to do and not sure how to react to it. We'll bring you some clips from last night. Charlie Rowley's here with me, former number 10 advisor. Charlie, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
You'll be able to get us through the weeds of all of this, I'm sure. Also, we will be playing you an awful lot of other stories as well this morning, because there's yet more nonsense on the asylum seeker front. And if you've forgotten how to get in touch with us, have a listen to this.
Hi Mike, it's Amanda from East Yorkshire here.
Hi Mike, it's Mike from Norwich.
Morning Mike, Dan from West Yorkshire here, great show as usual.
Hi Mike, Craig from Sheffield.
Hello, it's Judy from Altos, West Yorkshire.
Hi Mike, Phil from Nottingham. Great show.
Mike Graham, I love you. You know what, they need to give you another shift because I can't get enough.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm here for 4 hours every single day from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. We're also going to be telling you about how Rachel Reeves has driven the economy down the gurgler. It's 3% inflation now, as we broke the news yesterday, and it's all being blamed on the school fees VAT disaster. Also, we've got some whopping and eye-popping diaries from the Chief Whip, which we'll tell you about as well. And also comedy is being prescribed for mental health problems. Well, no more comedy better than the comedy you get from us here at Morning Glory. Let's get it on. So much to talk about this morning. Charlie Rowley's here, former number 10 advisor, of course. Quite remarkable, isn't it, the way the world has suddenly been gripped by what I'm going to call Trumpomania, because nobody quite seems to know how to react. I mean, there's a great piece by Alistair Heath in the Telegraph today, in which he completely lays out the groundwork for why Keir Starmer is the wrong Prime Minister at the wrong time because of all of this that's going on. Let me just read you a bit of this. If Keir Starmer really cared about the security of the West and the fate of Kiev, he would tear up his entire agenda. He would announce a rearmament programme a la 1934 and the reconstruction of a homegrown military-industrial supply chain. He would go for growth, ditch Rachel Reeves and Ed Miliband's leftist idiocy, suspend net zero to cut energy costs, slash taxes and deregulate. He would drastically increase the size of the armed forces, transform procurement and embrace AI and modern warfare technology. It goes on and on in that vein, and he's absolutely right. I mean, the point about Donald Trump and what he's saying to the West and what he's saying to Britain, effectively, is that, you know, we have neglected our defences for so long that things have happened around the world that we can literally do nothing about. You know, Keir Starmer's busy pledging £4.5 billion to Ukraine on the front page of the Mirror, money that we don't have. You know, Europe is in no position to defend itself. Europe is in no position to intervene in Ukraine, and we have sort of led ourselves here because of poor government, I would say, over the past decade and possibly over the last 2 decades. And suddenly now we're complaining that some guy in America is basically taking the law into his own hands.
I think that's absolutely right. And you could take what you've just said and you could say that was, you could argue that might be a reform spokesperson making these claims. That no doubt will be what the Tories are going to put forward at the next election, because everybody recognises that for too long the UK and other Western allies have relied on predominantly the US and NATO to be the funders of the Security sort of Council of the world. And Donald Trump, as we saw, it's not as if we weren't or shouldn't have been prepared for this. Even in his first term, he said that NATO needed to do more. European allies needed to stump up the cash for their own defences. You can't just rely on the US. And now, obviously, Donald Trump is getting involved in conflicts to try and resolve them, and saying things that are maybe uncomfortable, but it shakes the tree, and it makes people think, and people
and all this kind of pearl clutching about, oh, isn't he being horrible about Vladimir Zelensky? I mean, people seem to forget that Ukraine is a very complicated nation. I mean, there's a great piece in the Telegraph in their features section where they're talking about the people that might replace Zelensky. It's one of the things Trump came out with yesterday. I mean, again, the number of, I mean, if you were writing press releases for the White House, you'd be literally, you know, heading for the asylum. You'd be so busy. You're like, there's a press release every 2 minutes, you know. But he was calling for an election, calling Zelensky a dictator. I mean, there are something like 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 6 contenders that could be the next sort of leader of Ukraine, including the Putin stooge, who is Viktor Medvedchuk, who was the guy who apparently used to run a bunch of television stations, and he was shut down by Zelensky. Of course, you've got Vitaly Klitschko, the champion boxer. You've got Petro Poroshenko, who was the ex-president who lost the election to Zelensky in the first place. It's three or four other people. But, you know, it's a very, shall we say, unusual country, Ukraine. I mean, it hasn't ever been run in a democratic way, and to kind of pretend that that Vladimir Zelensky is some kind of, you know, Ed Davey lookalike, you know, and is like one of the politicians that we have in this country, is simply not true. You know, and to paint Ukraine as some kind of innocent party in anything is nonsensical, isn't it?
Well, I think, first of all, the idea of having a TV star or TV personality becoming a president of any nation is something. Can you imagine?
Very bizarre, that.
Where have we heard that
before?
We've
had, Ronald Reagan was the governor of California, one of the greatest presidents America ever had. I mean, he was an actor, you know, in fact, frighteningly, apparently he was the original choice for Casablanca rather than Humphrey Bogart. Can you imagine if Ronald Reagan had played that role? But anyway, I digress. But the point is that in the end, you know, we've now got a president of the United States of America who was speaking last night about a whole manner of things, a whole different range of things in terms of the waste of money that governments have spent on these ridiculous kind of, you know, woke agendas around the world, the way that we've wasted money on welfare, the way that we've wasted money on immigrants and paying for people to come and stay and live in hotels here. We've destroyed our own country from within. And he's basically warning us that if you don't stop doing that, you know, your country will be worthless, more or less.
And what he's done is, you know, is put very, very strong words out there because of the absence of leadership, I think, amongst everybody else. For too long, I think, in his view, everybody's been talking about how the war must come to an end, how we can bring a peaceful resolution, and whether that's through NATO, whether that's through supporting Ukraine, because in the West, obviously, it's an illegal invasion by Russia. But it's all talk
and that's the bit
no
that we shouldn't shirk from, because, again, people seem to be confused that, you know, people on the right can't admit that Putin invaded Ukraine. Well, of course he invaded Ukraine, and he did so in a manner which was entirely ghastly and horrible, and he killed a lot of innocent people, and that should not be forgotten.
Exactly. And I think, look, you know, if you're Boris Johnson, if Boris Johnson was sitting here, he'd be sort of saying, and probably tearing his hair out to say, well, look, you know, when I was Prime Minister, I wanted to give Ukraine lots more resource, much more early on, to try and, you know, just
Boris actually put a statement out yesterday, which was quite even-handed, actually. I mean, he said that he thought Trump was wrong to call Zelensky a dictator, but that also Trump was right to say that we need to absolutely build up our armed forces. And to finish the Alistair Heath thought, at the end of that paragraph I was reading to you, Starmer should reverse his splurge on the welfare state to pay for vastly more military personnel. He would fix our nuclear deterrent. With US foreign policy now centred around the promotion of free speech, he would cancel Britain's most illiberal laws and reposition himself as America's comrade in arms. And he would stop sucking up to China. You know, and these are all very good pieces of advice for Keir Starmer, none of which he will do, of course.
No, exactly, and that's the problem. That's why the Labour Party is sort of plummeting in the polls. That's why the PM's personal ratings are down in the doldrums, and that's why many people are looking for just common sense. I know we get that here on this show. This is the home of common sense.
It is, and it's a word, and it's a phrase that Donald Trump now uses liberally, uses it all the time. You know,
exactly, because this is what people out there in everyday, you know, outside of the Westminster bubble or outside the Washington elite, you know, it's everyday hard-working people that can just see through what politicians that have failed to do in the past, of all political parties in the UK, Tories included. Obviously, that's why they got an absolute thumping at the last election.
Yeah, no, they've neglected sort of their own country. They've forgotten about the defence of the realm completely, or perhaps willfully, and they've decided to spend that money elsewhere. Now, you can say they made that choice, but in my view, it's the wrong choice. You know, I remember talking to somebody from the government about 3 or 4 years ago, the Tory government, and they were talking about, and it was before, obviously, Russia invaded Ukraine and before Gaza and everything, and they were talking about how, you know, the need for tanks and military equipment was now a thing of the past. It was all about cyber. It was all about, you know, computers and people sitting behind, you know, and I'm thinking, you've been watching too much James Bond, you know. We've all seen Skyfall, you know, but it doesn't work out too well in the end. And at the end of the day, they've deliberately moved away from that sort of spending, and they've spent it more. I mean, yesterday we found out, 3 million people on universal benefit who are not even being asked to look for a job, never mind trying to find one, you know. And we've got billions and billions of pounds being paid out to illegal migrants who are coming to this country in their millions, you know. And it's just not going to be sustainable. And so Trump has taken a different view. He said it's time to reset the entire world. Meanwhile, I'm going to reset America. And I think an awful lot of people in this country will be in favour of it.
I think so, because what people want to see is action.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can chirp from the sidelines, you can be a spectator, but, you know, if you don't offer an alternative view, or even if you have an alternative view, but you've been in the position to do something about it and have failed, well, then there's no real seat at the table for you, I'm afraid. So he's getting on with it. He's ruffling feathers. I'm sure at some stage when he goes to talk to President Zelensky, he will say, well, look, hold on, look, I've spoken to Russia. Now, they've actually sort of prepared to move on X, Y, Z.
Exactly.
But I've had to show as if I'm sort of... Because the only way in which I think that this conflict's going to come to an end is if both of them can, you know, say that they've won, or that they've got something.
They've got something. But it's not sustainable for us as a country, and for the rest of the European countries, and for the rest of the world, and particularly America, who are not willing to do it, to just keep funneling billions and billions of pounds into a place where we, quite frankly, we don't even know what that money's being spent on. We don't know where it's going. There's lots of question marks about, you know, the hundreds of billions that have gone into the country, and what have we got to show for it? Not very much. Let's get a little clip here from Dan Crenshaw. Dan Crenshaw's a fascinating guy. He wears an eye patch for a start, which makes him interesting. He's a former Navy SEAL, but he's now in the House of Representatives, representative of Texas, 2nd District. He was on with Harry Cole yesterday on Never Mind the Ballots, and here he is talking about Trump and Russia.
And I would understand a lot of the hand-wringing if people hadn't seen him in action for 4 years, but we already saw him in action for 4 years. NATO didn't fall apart. That 4 years was built strengthening Ukrainian defenses, not the opposite. That 4 years was spent on action. Did he say nice things about Putin that made people mad? Yes. Did he do a lot of things against Russia, more than his predecessor ever had? Oh yeah. We killed a bunch of Russians in Syria, no problem. I mean, you know, we put additional sanctions on Russia. There was a number of things. Back when I was having this argument like 5 years ago, it's been a while, but I had like 6 things that I would repeat, and it was, these were not nothing. I mean,
the biggest expulsion of Russian spies and diplomats after.
Right. I mean, he takes pretty hard actions against Russia. So this is a strategy we should be more optimistic about.
I think he's right. You know, he's very pragmatic there and saying, look, you know, Trump has been in for 4 years, which is why I'm even more surprised in a way by the reaction to what he's doing, because people knew what Trump was like. The fact is, America wants him in charge. You know, they voted him in for a reason, and we've found as we go through the first, he's not even been in a month yet, the first month of his tenure, that the Joe Biden presidency was completely and utterly insane, profligate with money in the way that nobody knew, billions and billions of dollars going to all sorts of places like, the trans movement of Colombia or something, you know, just completely mad stuff. handing money hand over fist to Zelensky without really any guarantees that, one, they would get it back, or two, what it was going to be spent on.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly why, as you know, the businessman is coming to the fore. Look, Donald Trump has got 4 years, it's his second term, every day counts, and he's not going to waste any second of worrying about what he says or who he upsets, because he just wants to get results at the end of the day. That's all he's focused on, it's results driven, and at the end of the 4 years he will, I'm sure, be able to say, look, you know, it might have not been the most conventional way of going about things, but that's why he's been elected, that's why he's been so popular, that's why he's stood 3 times and has been able to come back, you know, the biggest political comeback I think we've ever seen, because he gets results, however you like it. And, you know, if you don't like it, well, you can lump it, because he's actually delivered on things that he said that he's going to do, which might be bringing about peace in a roundabout way.
And, of course, Keir Starmer going off to Washington, I think, in the next few days, if not at the end of this week, at the beginning of next week, by the looks of things. A lot of people seem to think that, you know, now he could be in a good place. But as I say, Alistair Heath doesn't think he's got the nous, or he's got the experience, or he's even got the kind of the chutzpah to go into the Oval Office and suggest anything to Donald Trump, because he's such a weak leader.
Yeah, I think that relationship, again, is, you know, the Donald being who he is, when there was a readout of the telephone call that they had between the Prime Minister and Donald Trump, you know, it was very warm, it was very friendly, the readouts, because I think, you know, and that, I think, brought a nice smile to the Prime Minister's face. But you can't be fooled that this is the president obviously trying to bring allies in, but when push comes to shove, you know, Keir Starmer has got absolutely nothing on the
Well, there's no reason for him to
States.
really be there. Trump doesn't need him for anything.
No.
I mean, people who are sort of being more over-friendly to Starmer and Labour will say, well, perhaps he could be the bridge between the US and the European Union. I don't really see it. I don't see why Starmer would suddenly become a significant figure, because he's so insignificant and hapless and hopeless at everything that he does.
Yeah, and I think, look, what we've seen from the Prime Minister, he's very happy to not be in the UK, actually. Every weekend he seems to be out at a European meeting somewhere or other, and trying to rebuild that relationship with the EU, arguably taking us back into the EU through the back door. You know, if he's just all about meetings and process, well, that's, you know, that's not going to help anybody.
Again, the EU is floundering around because they are seeming more irrelevant than ever. I mean, you know, the individual countries are saying things about what's going on in Ukraine, but the European Union has more or less sort of faded away into the background, hasn't it?
Yeah, totally. And at a time when you're seeing across Europe, obviously, you know, in Italy, you know, we've got strong leadership in Italy. You know, there's the rise of the AfD in Germany.
The German Chancellor's about to change, isn't it?
Exactly. And obviously you're seeing, you know, the polls in a particular direction in this country with reform. People are crying out for change, common sense, but also getting back to a situation where we're not part of this globalist. You can work with European allies, you can work with whoever you want across the world. But actually, if governments just keep throwing money at, you know, big organisations or projects in the hope that that's going to help, and not focusing on the everyday bread and butter issues of restoring their own home nations, then I think those governments are going to fail.
Yeah, I think that's right. You're absolutely right. This from Marco in Swindon. I think a lot of people misunderstand Donald Trump. He really seems to understand the value of money. That is why he's so genuinely, deeply shocked at the wastage of money by government. The problem with our Labour government is they do not understand the value of money. They have all had plenty of it in their lifetime and think nothing of squandering it on woke and pointless projects. I think Donald Trump is absolutely correct to be questioning where the money has gone in Ukraine. I would have done exactly the same thing. And even if you just base his sort of, you know, raison d'etre, if you like, on the money, I mean, it's a very, very good question. Where is all the money going, and what is it being spent on, and why does Vladimir Zelensky not want to negotiate a peace deal? Yeah, because that seems to be, he would rather stay at war. That seems to me to be the situation.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think everybody recognises is unsustainable.
Yeah.
Obviously, any war is unsustainable for forever. But you're right. But this is again where, you know, you get people who are maybe slightly more out of touch, or have become, you know, very comfortable in the metropolitan elite, or whether it's say Whitehall or Westminster or in the White House.
Right.
You know, you as the President of the United States. And Donald Trump obviously recognises that every dime counts.
Yeah.
And, you know, he will take trips, just as our Prime Minister should in this country, if he goes to, say, the Rust Belt.
Right.
You know, he's got to look voters in the eye and say, I'm restoring our industrial strategy.
Right.
I'm creating jobs in the US for you and your families
Yes.
and your future, which has been totally disregarded by previous presidents.
Yeah.
He's got a domestic role. Obviously he has. And he wants to focus on that.
Right.
But you can only do that by saying to the rest of the world, This is US taxpayers' money that we're spending in Ukraine, that we're spending all over the world.
And we're not going to spend it anymore.
And exactly, because I want to spend it on the country that's actually elected me, the greatest country in the world, in his view, and I'm going to protect jobs and people in my own home.
Totally. And I think everybody with his brain would understand that and accept it. At 21 minutes past 6, Charlie Rowley's here. We've got much more to do, many more stories to talk about, including the latest on Jonathan Reynolds. My bet is he's not going to be in for very much longer in this cabinet. This is Morning Glory.
On what happened in the case of the market crisis of 2022, the Bank of England have since admitted it was their fault. They've admitted that 2/3 of all of that market movement was down to their failure to regulate pensions. But they were successfully blamed it on me. And as you know, Alex, we've got a very supine mainstream media in this country. They spend a lot of their time being briefed and leaked to by the permanent bureaucracy. They spend a lot of the Bank of England have since admitted it was their fault.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 6:24. I'm Mike Graham. We have got a lot to do today. We're here till 10 o'clock, of course. Alex Phillips is in after that. One from, where are we? Tony, who says this: Europe is going to pay a heavy price for siding with Zelensky. Two-tier Kiev will drive us into the arms of the EU. President Trump is leaving bankrupt Europe to swing, and rightly so too. And this is, I think, the thing that a lot of people, certainly in the political sphere in this country, who have got this kind of, I think, a little bit wrong, don't understand about the British people. There's an awful lot of people in Britain who are, one, fed up with the war in Ukraine, two, fed up with the fact that we're giving them loads of money, three, very fed up with the European Union and our kind of continual inability to distance ourselves from it and to still be connected to it in so many different ways. And so when you see headlines like the one in the Daily Mail where they talk about the world sort of in horror, Trump appalls the world with dictator Zelensky, I don't think he's appalled the world, do you?
No, I think it's most people, as they recognise what Donald Trump is like. They know how he operates, and this is just a classic Trump. But you're right. I think there'll be many people who, when they also see other headlines about sending 30,000 troops, whether that's UK or whether that's a combination of UK and EU forces to the border, people don't want British forces in another country. People will be very sceptical about all of a sudden, a new Labour Prime Minister that's not been in all that long, all of a sudden committing troops across the world. People will just think, is there something wrong with our leaders? Is there something wrong with the Labour Party leadership that just wants to keep sending troops and getting involved in wars and conflicts across the world?
Why don't you let it all just play out and see where it goes, because surely peace talks are better than, throwing missiles at each other.
Yeah, exactly.
But, call me old-fashioned. Let's come a bit closer to home and look at Jonathan Reynolds. He's still in the news. I mean, despite the fact that he was admonished yesterday, it turns out that basically not only was he shamefully calling himself a solicitor, but he only stopped when he was actually approached a few weeks ago, or maybe a couple of fortnights ago, by the Regulatory Authority for the Solicitors, which is, I think, the Solicitors Regulation Authority, as it's called, who told him he should stop calling himself a solicitor and stop actually saying that he had been a solicitor, because he never was.
Exactly. He'd been a trainee solicitor, I think, in his sort of Manchester days there, never really qualified. But yet it's been on documents, it was on his LinkedIn, his CV profile, a public-facing, obviously.
There's a clip of him actually in the House of Parliament, which we're going to try and find and play, in which he says that he was a solicitor.
Exactly, and I think he's done it several times at speeches in the past. And it's never necessarily the fault of something that gets it's always the cover-up.
Yeah.
And you saw this with Rachel Reeves, at one point it was, her CV is totally embellished, as we know, the number of years that she worked, or claimed to work at the Bank of England. But, Jonathan Reynolds is the second cabinet minister now that's been caught by massaging his actual sort of experience on his CV, but to blame an office sort of staffer or an advisor.
This is not going to wash, is it?
It's not going to wash, of course. No. But so you've either got, because you would have had to approve that at every speech, you would have had to fact.
Well, the fact that he's actually said it, and in fact, I think Luke Johnson, the entrepreneur, put out a tweet last night to say that I sat next to Jonathan Reynolds at a dinner once, and he spent a long time telling me how he used to be a solicitor.
Yes,
so it's not as if he can pretend that, this is just something that somebody made up and he didn't realise it had happened. He's been telling people this for over a decade.
Exactly. And, you can hold your hands up and apologise and say, I might just have got that wrong, or, OK, sorry, and move, and try and move the story on.
Yeah.
But once it's now appeared, or once you've denied it to say it's just an admin error, we'll fix, and I've never actually said that before.
Finding
hold
all
on.
sorts. Yeah.
Exactly.
And we've got now Robert Jenrick, Shadow Justice spokesman, last night urging the regulator, who has the power to prosecute people who falsely claim to be lawyers, to launch a full investigation. He said he considers Mr Reynolds' claims a prima facie breach of the Solicitors Act 1974 and the Legal Services Act 2007, which make it a criminal offence to pretend to be a solicitor. Because, I said this yesterday, far more serious, really, to pretend to be a solicitor than Rachel Reeves pretending that she had a bigger job than she did in the Bank of England or in HBOS. At the end of the day, he's actually attempting to make people believe that he's something he's not, and that he's qualified in it's a legal office, really, to be a solicitor. It enables you to have all sorts of rights that you can, sign people's, you can be a witness to things, you can be a reference for people, all of the things that solicitors can do, which he can't do because he isn't one.
Exactly, and there is a huge difference between being a trainee, where you might have read up on the skills, and they're not taking that away from him, or anyone that's out there studying whatever they want to study, but there's a difference between a trainee and then having the world experience of doing that job. And as
we've got apprentices working in this building, even now, they probably don't come in quite as early as this, but, they're working away, beavering away, hoping to become, me in the future, and they might as well write a CV now and say, I presented the breakfast show on tour, while I was at the News UK building, and it's not true.
Exactly.
In other words, it's a lie.
It is, and look, Linton Crosby, the great sort of Australian strategist that came in to run Tory elections for years, he would always say, there's the barnacles on the boat. It's never one thing that gets you, but systematic build-up of these barnacles on the boat.
And there's a lot of them.
There's a lot of them. You're going to get holes and you're going to sink. And so Rachel Reeves, now Jonathan Reynolds, there's obviously all the stuff about Lord Hammer.
Lord Hammer's still going on. There was Andrew Gwynn, there was Tulip Sadiq, there was all the way back to Sue Gray, there was, what's her name, Lou Haig, the convicted fraudster. There's a lot of it.
Glasses and,
freebies from Lord Ali.
It all adds up.
It does. And it doesn't add up to anything good, I'm afraid. Speaking of adding up, the front of the Times today, about £5 billion worth of welfare cuts are being planned by ministers who are battling over how to spend the savings. I say this in reference to the fact that £5 billion apparently is going to go over to to Ukraine, thanks to our Prime Minister and his love for Vladimir Zelensky. Again, these are going to be quite... I mean, I'm glad they're going to make welfare cuts, but once again, you're going to be having... You know, the government are going to have to answer for why they're cutting back on people's ability to claim benefits when they're giving money away to Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't add up.
It doesn't, and that's why the whole thing that the government sort of, I think, is on a sticky wicket on this, because it's got no strategy.
Yeah.
You know, it's talked the talk about going for growth. I mean, it talked about during the general election not putting up national insurance contributions, and look where that got us. You know, and now it's had to reverse ferret because it's now had to talk up the economy because obviously the economy is tanked. But now, as you say, you know, it's targeting pensioners, taking away the winter fuel. It's targeting farmers, which isn't going to make that much money.
And it's targeting every single business in April with the national insurance rise.
Exactly, to say that we've got to trim the fat, we've got to make, because of the terrible black hole that the nasty Tories left behind. All the while, you're right, 4 billion to Ukraine, 18 billion maybe to the Chagos Islands. But where is all this money coming from? People will be looking at this government thinking, what on earth are you doing?
I know, they don't know, they have no idea. Let's have a look at what Starmer said before, of course, because one of the big stories yesterday was that Ed Miliband was unfortunately unable to say when the £300 saving that he had said we were going to make in our energy bills is coming, because in fact, quite the reverse, £85 increase is coming next week. But here's Starmer promising to freeze the bills just before the election.
Well, Ella, what we're going to do for you and for anyone is freeze those energy bills going forward. Because, Ella, I don't know your circumstances, but I doubt when you hear, you know, the energy companies and the government talking about £3,500 possibly for energy bills going up to £4,000. I suspect, like many, many other people, you shudder at that because these are huge, huge amounts of money, which is why we say under a Labour government we'd freeze those prices. We wouldn't allow them to go up, Ella, because what you're already paying is going to go through the roof. And I don't know how you would cope with that, Ella.
Yeah. You don't care either, do you, Keir? I think this will be the third rise in the energy bill since they've been in power, for less than, 8 months?
Quite possibly, and I think, look, there is only so long you can ride on the back of, you know, the failures of the previous government to say, well, we've got to make tough decisions because what we inherited. The public will see through this because you can do that if you're just making, say, cuts, for example. If you say, look, we've got no money, so we've got to make cuts. That's why in 2010, obviously, there was a coalition government, but the Tories went on to win outright because, I don't think the country really wanted a coalition and saw the Lib Dems as sort of passengers there, but also wanted strong leadership, but understood, OK, there's a mission here, we've got to make cuts. That's it, because there's been too much borrowing, too much spending and higher taxes. What this government can't do and won't have that sort of you know, the support of the British public is because they have made choices. They have chosen in the budget to raise taxes, to borrow huge amounts of money, even more so than what Liz Truss was.
They borrowed 17 billion in December alone.
Exactly. Right? So the idea that they can now say, well, you know, and that's why inflation's gone up. That's why confidence is low. That's why there's no growth. And choking off growth through, or any kind of growth through rising national insurance contributions, which is going to hit small businesses who are the backbone of our economy. Plus there's a rise in the national wage, which is just, again, another burden for businesses if they can't afford it. So you're going to end up laying people off. There's going to be more people out of work.
Cheering the day before because they had a figure that said that, you know, national wages were up. And I said, well, yeah, that's because they've given all these public sector pay rises. It's not actually going to be a good thing for the economy. And sure enough, the next day, oh, inflation's gone up as well. How surprising.
Exactly.
You know, and we've got in the Mail a big spread on pages 12 and 13 about the school fees, VAT, being put on, which is now completely backfired and is actually being blamed for the inflationary rise because, again, the people who can afford to pay it are paying it, so prices have gone up. But many more people who can't afford to pay it are putting their kids in state schools who don't have any room. So we've got cases of children being taxed to school, sort of, you know, 20-mile round trip here, 30-mile round trip there, £15,000 to put them in another school somewhere out of the area. It's just madness. There's no, as you say, there's no plan at all.
Exactly. And these were choices that the government made. They can't blame them on anybody else.
No.
They thought that this would be part of the solution. Everybody said, no, that won't work, actually, or you shouldn't be doing that. But they pursued it anyway. And what's worse, with all of these scandals that seem to take place within the current government at the minute, they sort of double down, they bury their head in the sand, there's no accountability. It's either doubling down to say to the public, well, hold on, you know, if you want a functioning NHS, if you want then we've got to take these measures. That's total baloney, because there'll be people sitting at home realising that the government has, as they made these choices, they have not worked out.
No.
And I fear that,
they don't seem to have the strength or the wisdom to understand that if something isn't working, you change it. You don't just keep going with it and going, well, let's hope for the best and just hope for, a couple of years' time things will be better. No, they won't be better. They'll be worse.
Yeah. And what they do is they sack people like Emily Thornberry, who during the general election said, well, take the VAT on schools. She was very open during an interview, slightly off the cuff, but she said, well, if that means overinflated class sizes in the state sector, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And she didn't appear in the cabinet when Labour won, because Labour HQ went absolutely bonkers when she sort of said that.
But it's like they were sticking their fingers in their ears and going, no, we don't want to hear that.
But it takes the public for fools, because the Labour HQ mentality, I can only assume, would be that sort of, we can't tell the public the truth because actually that will scare the...
But except I was telling the public that, so they know the truth, not just because I'm telling them, because they're not stupid.
Yeah.
Going, look, if you take people out of the private sector and put them in the public sector, schools are going to be overcrowded. They're already overcrowded. It's not going to work, and it doesn't work. Sharon in Staffordshire says this, morning, Mike, I agree with everything Trump is saying about Zelensky. This man does not want this war to stop. Remember, he's getting all these billions from the UK and other countries, so why would he want this war to end? And he cannot even account for where billions of this money has gone. Starmer needs to stop dishing out taxpayers' money to Ukraine. The British people do not want to give this country our money. He needs to stop now. And I think Sharon's right. A lot of people will agree with that. An awful lot of people. Coming up, we're going to talk about why comedy is going to be prescribed for people suffering from mental health problems by the NHS, no less. Also, apparently people who work in the NHS who are from Generation Z or Z, whichever you prefer, take off more time sick than ever and much more time off sick than their older compadres. Also, we'll be talking some more about some rather eye-popping diaries that are in the Daily Mail from the Chief Whip, who's written a book about some rather miscreant Tories. It's a bit early in the morning for some of this stuff, but I'll try and get Charlie Rowley to explain it to you. Brothels, late-night taxis, spies, all manner of scandal. It's all coming up after this on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 6:39. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock, of course. Charlie Rowley's here with me as well. Lots going on. We should talk, I suppose, about the NHS. I mean, one of the things that the government did spend money on when they got in, £23 billion went to the NHS straight away by West Streeting. We've now been told that that has been sunk basically into pay rises for all the people that wanted them, 22% for junior doctors, some more for nurses, etc., etc. They came out last week and said, we've reduced the waiting lists and we've found 2 million more appointments, which everybody kind of immediately went, well, maybe, okay then, but you're comparing apples and oranges because they were comparing it with the periods last year when they had strikes. Today they're saying that basically this good idea that they've had, which is to put comedy on prescription for people suffering from mental health problems, which on the face of it doesn't sound too bad, but you know they'll just make a complete mess of it because they won't put any comedians in who aren't completely and utterly woke. You won't be able to make jokes about anything which is actually funny. I mean, I'm saying outside, you know, you can't imagine them hiring Jim Davidson Stevenson to come in and make everybody have a great old laugh about some of his material, can you?
No, but you know, there'll be maybe some people in the game of a particular age that would actually prefer Jim Davidson.
Well, they probably
you know.
would, yeah. But you can imagine how woke the comedians will be.
Yes, yeah. So it won't be particularly funny to the crowd. You're absolutely right.
No.
Yeah, I mean, on the surface, as you say, it's an interesting story because it's about getting people, I think, off, whether it's medication or to stop this sort of pill-popping culture that we have, where you can just turn up to a GP, we can turn up somewhere and say, look, you know, I'm having a terrible week, or I'm having a bit of a crisis.
Have some antidepressants.
Have some antidepressants. So, you know, it's a way of sort of, you know, whether it's comedy, whether it's long walks, or whether it's joining a choir, whether it's sort of these therapies that can actually help. And I think there's you know, it's certainly value looking into, but you're right, you know, with anything that's totally state control and sort of, you know, run by people that don't actually get it, it'll end up being a total disaster.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be. They've also got some other ideas. They say prescriptions include also walking in nature, joining a choir, or taking part in a gardening project. I mean, all of these things are possibly even things that would work, but you know, do you really need to have them prescribed? Because I don't know how you work. I don't know how you mean that. Because I know that people, for example, are getting prescriptions for all manner of conditions, like needing to have their hair washed. So, you know, if you apparently go to a doctor, he will actually prescribe shampoo for you, so that you can go and get free shampoo from a chemist, which must be a massive waste of money.
I think it is, and I think that's totally where I think chemists should just be able to do that anyway, or people can do more if you actually need. I mean,
but do you really need to be given free shampoo? I mean, you've already got benefits, you've already got money coming to you, you've already got your housing paid for, you've already got your council tax paid for. If you can't wash your own hair or get your kids' hair washed, I mean, I'm not going to pay. Why should I be paying for it? Is what I would say.
Well, I hadn't heard that before. That's a new.
Yeah, no, they do. No, they absolutely do. I mean, things which you can buy over the counter, they get prescribed because it means they get them for free.
Gosh,
it's ridiculous.
Well, it is. Yeah.
Speaking of things that come for free, a Sudanese asylum seeker in front page of the Telegraph has been declared to be a child by immigration judges, despite the Home Office saying he was at least 23 with a receding hairline. I mean, these stories are unbelievable.
Exactly, and it's the Home Office sort of thought it was a 23-year-old. The Immigration Tribunal overturned the Home Office decision.
This is the same guy as the one who said the Gaza family could come, isn't it?
Exactly, and I think, you know, the story obviously earlier on in the week that this caused, you know, whether she was a High Court judge, can't remember her name, but Lady Carr.
Lady Carr, that's right, yeah.
Who's sort of
the Chief Justice, I think she
Chief
is.
Justice, and she sort of criticised Asa Kistama and Kemi Badenoch for having this exchange at PMQs about the decision. But to be fair, both Kemi and the Prime Minister are absolutely right. It's a terrible decision. A Ukrainian scheme was set up, and you've let in somebody from not Ukraine. It doesn't matter whether they're from Gaza or anywhere else for that matter. They're just not Ukrainian, so that's not the whole point of the scheme. And now to hear that that particular, you say you're right, that judge Hugo Norton-Taylor. We can name him, I think.
I mean, Lady Carr might not like it, but, you know, we don't care.
Well, exactly. But, you know, the idea that the Home Office, the UK government is saying this is someone who is 20, this is not someone that is a child.
No.
Just to be overturned by clearly someone that is overly sympathetic to people, that anyone that seems.
And we have had cases before of so-called children being admitted into the country and then being put in schools, where they then harassed a lot of the young girls in the schools because they weren't children.
Yes,
you know, they were males of about 20, 24 years old.
Yes,
It's absolutely shocking, and they didn't look like children either.
No, exactly, and that's the point. I mean, who is running this show? Who is the one to sort of, you know, say, hold on a second, okay, on a piece of paper, on a process sort of thing that's been passed to me, okay, name,
He says he
address,
was born in, you know, 2007.
Yes.
Well, really?
Yeah, exactly. Who is there to question? You know, we're far too soft on these things because it's about not offending people. You know, but you know, people should be offended at times.
Well, there's another one inside the Telegraph. This is one you'll like as well. This is a man who's called Hassan Abu Haley. We can't name the other guy, of course, because he's apparently a child.
Yes.
Right? But this guy we can name. He's a Syrian refugee who came to this country and unfortunately attacked a 19-year-old girl after driving around at 3 a.m. in search of vulnerable, drunken young women in Bournemouth, right? He was due to be sentenced yesterday, but the hearing was adjourned after his defence barrister argued that sending him to prison might breach his human rights because he's suffering from PTSD because he was tortured under the former regime of deposed dictator Bashar al-Assad. Well, I'm sorry. I mean, if people have been damaged to that extent, I've said this before, we said it about the Southport killer, we said it about all sorts of people that have been let into this country from very, very dangerous parts of the world, that basically, if you are mentally, unwell because of something that's happened to you in your home country, why are we letting you into this country? We don't owe them any kind of, we don't owe Syria any kind of, guarantee of safety. Why are we doing it?
Yes, I think that's a massive question that people right across the country want to know how, and that's when you sort of hear people that say, that they want more safe and legal routes for people to come to the UK. Well, it should be for the government to decide where in parts of the world that they want to sort of help. I mean, rightly or wrongly, but I do think that that's the right of the government of the day. But
it's also the right of the people to expect the government to keep us safe.
Exactly.
I.e., don't import people who are going to be dangerous. And don't import people who you don't know might kill us.
Exactly. And look, we all totally obviously support, a fair and open legal process. Obviously, you've got to have some form of defence. I think if you're on a trial somewhere, that's just part of our nature, and you're innocent until proven good. But you don't have to be a highly paid barrister or from a chambers that's probably getting legal aid, so taxpayers' money, to put up a defence like that against someone that has been caught and someone that is clearly, as you say, going around at 3 a.m. trying to pick up, young girls in Bournemouth who are drunk and not in control of what they're doing. That is a targeted, sadistic predator. And the idea that anyone can say, well, hold on, because of his situation in some far-flung country, he can't go to prison. That has to be stamped out.
So let's let him out on the street so that he can continue to prey on women until one day perhaps he does somebody a really, really terrible injury.
Exactly. It's almost as if...
That is the problem.
Yes, it's the balance that is always, the problem within our legal system, that the victims, and people particularly that are coming from different countries, we just have to lump it.
Absolutely right. Mark in Selby says this, Mike, before the war, Ukraine was considered a corrupt and dangerous country. I suspect that after the war, Zelensky and members of his party will be found out for trousering a lot of the money that the rest of the world has poured into Ukraine. Trump perhaps knows about this, though he's being diplomatic in not calling it out yet. Well, that's possible. I mean, certainly Elon Musk was putting out a tweet last night of, Zelensky and his wife on the cover of Vogue magazine, which was right at the height of the war, saying, and they did this at the height of the war. I mean, there are questions that I think legitimately can be asked. Let's have a quick clip from Donald Trump, though, because last night, after all of this business with Russia and Zelensky, he wasn't finished yet. Because I had to actually switch it off and go to sleep last night. It was about 11 o'clock. I was like, I can't stop watching it. He was speaking to an assembled crowd, I think in Washington, D.C., talking about all the money that's been wasted under the Biden regime. And have a look at this. This is the Social Security budget that was being spent.
And the record topper, there is one person on Social Security who's 360 years old, which is approximately 110 years older than our country.
I mean, this is a series of things that he read out, basically saying that, there are people aged 20 to 129, 3.47 million of them claiming Social Security. I mean, obviously, these people don't exist, right? Ages 130 to 139, 3.94 million. 140 to 149, 354 million, 3.54 million, and 150 to 159, 1.35 million. So you've basically got something like 12 million people aged between 120 and 160 claiming Social Security. And you just go, well, that's insane, isn't it? And what it points to is that the systems that we've had in the West now for all of these welfare payments, benefit shirkers and all the rest of it are completely useless and completely redundant, and they all needs to be changed.
Exactly, and it's about accountability now. So who is it that's actually signed off on either that policy or has made that sort of the situation? And we've got to completely reform the way that we do things. And, government departments, whether it's in the UK or the US, I think for too long, have obviously wanted to protect their budgets. So if they underspend, then of course the Treasury isn't going to give them, the same amount that they gave them the last year. They'll give them less.
Well, they're completely profligate with our money.
Yeah, exactly. But that should be championed. If you can do more for less, then you should be promoted.
Exactly.
But government departments here, particularly in the UK, think, oh no, we must protect our budget. Therefore, right, we've got an underspend, so let's spend it quickly. So that's why you hear all these, mad stories about about government departments spending too much money, spaffing it up the wall, and going on to projects that people just think, what on earth is my money being spent on?
It's almost like they're looking around the world to see where they can waste it.
Yeah, exactly.
Although there's some termite investigations going on in a woodshed somewhere in Panama. Yeah. Let's give them a couple of billion. And Trump was also making the point last night, we might play some more of this later on through the show, that, when you give money, and we're talking about condoms given to Gaza, right, $100 million worth. And he said, we all know what condoms are. It's an awful lot of condoms. It's an awful lot of money. Why does it cost $100 million? And he also talks about, I think, Sesame Street going over to do a production somewhere in Africa, $50 million. He said, I've done television. He said, I know what it costs. You pay the cast $50,000. It would cost you maybe $250,000, not $50 million. And that's the other problem. It's all just, think of a number and make it multiply by 10.
Yeah, exactly. And look, we know, look, even from COVID, there were some charlatans out there that wanted to get government contracts that couldn't fulfil. And, you had people in government that awarded those contracts because they probably weren't of a business mind.
Because everyone knows if you can get your teeth into a government contract, nobody's going to ask any questions.
Exactly, because people that are offering those contracts, and whether it's civil servants here or whether it's people abroad, in other countries, America, that are facing the same issue, these people aren't business-minded. They don't know how to do procurement. They don't care. So it's just, we need it. Okay, that's the price.
Yeah.
And no one's investigating it. No one's scrutinising it. No one's saying that's a terrible deal.
Yeah.
And so when you've got sort of Donald Trump and Elon Musk coming in, setting up, I like to call it Doge, but I think it's Doge.
Doge, is how they say it. It's got a sort of a French-sounding thing to it, Doge.
But quite right, coming in and making massive cuts to say, well, hold on, because all of this, we will keep some of the money, but that money should be going to exactly the right people.
And he's under fire from people who say, well, you've shut everything down and now it doesn't work. And he's like, yeah, because that's what you do. You shut it down and then you let the people back into the building who actually know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And the ones who don't know what they're doing, leave them out. I mean, it's very straightforward. Got some great texts coming in. Keep them coming. Send us a voice note as well, 0344 499 1000 to WhatsApp. Coming up, we'll talk about Emma Raducanu, the tennis player who had some kind of terrible security scare from a stalker over in Dubai. And also, consumer confidence, believe it or not, has hit a new low. We'll talk about that too. 6:51.
Putin's the bad guy here, but again, he has 4,500 nuclear warheads. He is doing, he's the uncontrollable one in this thing. It is a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia. So the fact that we're leaving Zelensky out, who hasn't had an election in quite some time, and we're leaving the Europeans out, who are useless and haven't supported Ukraine, this has to be between the bad guy and the U.S., who are supporting the good guys, if you want to make that argument.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
6:54, welcome back to Morning Glory, with you all the way through until 10 o'clock, of course. Let's get a voice note from Pete.
Morning, Mike. Pete from Lincolnshire. Great show. Regarding the judges, who's in charge of them? Who is their ultimate boss? Surely there must be KPIs that these people have to attain, and surely they can be put onto a sort of sanction list where they're removed from judging and making decisions on certain things. These people are working against the interests of this country, and they need to be stopped. Cheers.
I think there's no doubt that they should be supervised, and they probably are supervised, but they're probably supervised by the same people who agree with everything they're doing. I mean, that's the problem. Like Lady Carr, who basically came out the other day as a Chief Justice, so I think she would probably be one of the top people that they would probably answer to in the business, by saying that, oh, it's wrong to criticise them. They should be left alone to be able to make their judgments without any kind of scrutiny whatsoever, and politicians to stay out of it. And if they don't like the judgments, then they should launch some kind of appeal process. Well, that's not how the democracy works. Is it, Charlie?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And look, it's the government of the day, to make the laws.
Yeah.
So they have ultimately the higher authority, or should do anyway, because then it's for judges to, whatever they feel personally, whatever their political views are, it is for them to enact the law. And look, if there's a loophole, okay, and somebody's got away with it because of a legal argument, or you might have a barrister that was able to present an argument better than what maybe they should. It's all about outcomes and the spirit of the law as well. And this is where I think in the last couple of cases that we've talked about,
well, there's practically a case a week. I mean, possibly more than one a week. And I think that's the worry, that there is some kind of pattern here, that the people who are making these judgments on these immigrant tribunals are clearly biased against the people of this country and pro all the people who want to come in. Let's talk about Emma Raducanu, though. She got very emotional on court in Dubai yesterday after she spotted a man in the crowd who had previously been showing what she regarded as fixated behaviour towards her. Very difficult time for her. It must be. I mean, she's had a rough old time, Emma Raducanu. I know that people won't give her probably too much sympathy because she's done very well for herself, made a lot of money, but you shouldn't have to be in the public eye and put up with this kind of rubbish, should you?
Yeah, exactly right, because she's already had to deal, I think, with one stalker, and she's obviously, still quite young, or was sort of young, coming into the public eye. Yeah, she had some guy that kept
turning up at her house, didn't she?
Exactly. So she's already had to deal with that. Then to sort of, have this other ongoing thing with this guy who she then, during mid-match, looks up and sees, him in the crowd. That's incredibly unsettling, and she got obviously very unsettled on the court and had to sort of stop briefly, and then it was dealt with. But it's just, it's uncomfortable viewing to see, anyone, but particularly, a young woman who's in the peak of her career, or should be at the peak of her career, sort of distressed by off-goings,
exactly right,
off her profession.
One final one, which will probably not please the people who think they're doing great things by making everybody wear high-visibility jackets, but apparently high-visibility jackets, according to the front page of the Times, and reflective strips designed to keep cyclists and pedestrians safe can actually make them invisible to modern car safety systems. So if you're driving along at night with your high-vis jacket on and your lycra shorts and your ridiculous-looking helmet, and you think everyone can see you, apparently they can't.
No, and nobody I would encourage to wear lycra at any given time.
There should be, in fact, there should be a fine for it.
Exactly. And you're right. That's the irony about modern technology these days, is that yes, you can have a modern car that sort of just doesn't pick up the high vis.
Because a lot of cars now, I guess what they're talking about, have these sort of measures, don't they, which slow them down, or in fact even emergency stop them if they think you can hit something. But researchers dressed mannequins in a variety of outfits and moved them into the path of 3 cars fitted with these new modern sort of autonomous emergency braking systems, and basically none of them stopped for the cyclists and just ran straight into them because they couldn't read the high-vis strips or the high-vis jackets.
Yes, exactly. And even if a cyclist pulled out when they shouldn't have done, which we see, I think, all too often. I'm pro cycling, but I think
I'm pro cycling in a velodrome.
Well,
if you want to go to a velodrome and cycle round and round and round, great, good for you.
But I'm seeing far too often cyclists that are not abiding by the highway code.
No, exactly right. We see it every day. I mean, I see cyclists. It's getting a bit lighter now, so not quite so often. But certainly in the depths of winter, you'll see a cyclist cycling along a road with no lights, dressed completely in black, and it's dark. And you're kind of going, well, what's the point of that exactly? Are you trying to get yourself killed? You know. And then, in addition to that, you're going the wrong way down a one-way street. One final one. We haven't got enough time for you to explain it, I'm afraid. There's a new book out by some former chief Tory whip. An MP stuck in a brothel with a KGB agent, 12 naked women and CCTV is only one of the stories. I mean, thank God we haven't got time to explain it.
Exactly. Well, yeah, thank God. And there's also a couple of other stories in there as well about, the behaviour of some cabinet ministers.
MPs seem to be prone to scandal, don't they?
Exactly. And if you're the chief chief whip, I mean, you know, it is it's not the best job in the world, I don't think, but it sort of provides a lot of
You know a lot of secrets.
You know where the bodies are buried. And
do you know any stories that you can't tell anyone?
I don't think we have enough time.
No, we haven't. I just need a yes or a no. do you know things that you can't say?
Well, you always hear things, whether or not it turns out to be true or not. But obviously, in the case of the chief whip, getting a text at 2:30 a.m. to say please help, you know, that's on the record.
Absolutely. So. Charlie, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed, Charlie Rowley there. More from Morning Glory coming up after this.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened. I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. The shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, Oivamo slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia. These are the missiles that Biden has approved for the use by Ukraine.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 7. Welcome to Thursday. It's the 20th of February. It's an extraordinary day, really, because all of the papers pretty much on the front pages, with the exception of The Sun, although they've got a little bit of it. It's all about Trump. It's all about Zelensky. It's all about what Donald Trump said yesterday, of course, about how he believes Volodymyr Zelensky is a dictator, a blistering attack where he said he better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. He's been roundly condemned for that by an awful lot of people. An awful lot of editorials are saying, look, you know, you might support what Donald Trump is doing, but he can't really go around calling Zelensky a dictator. I would take a view that what Trump is doing is indeed all about the end result. It's not necessarily about the immediate reaction to what it is that he's saying on a daily basis. Volodymyr Zelensky obviously not very happy about it. Plenty of people pointing out that the real dictator in this picture is Vladimir Putin, which I think everybody with a brain knows for sure. And also, he invaded Ukraine. It wasn't the other way around. There's no question about that. And there's no point in pretending that what Donald Trump said there was correct. But I think you have to look beyond what Donald Trump said and and wonder why he's saying it. And he's saying it because he's sick to death of sending billions and billions of American dollars to Ukraine to help fight a war which apparently isn't going anywhere. And Keir Starmer supposedly should be in the same boat, but he's not, because the American special relationship with the UK seems to be dead and buried right now, because Starmer's promising to send them another £4.5 billion and to keep the war going, for heaven's sake. Money which we do not have. Let's get a voice note from Sean.
Morning, Mike. Sean from Grimsby here. So Donald Trump rips into Zelensky again. Do I agree with him? Not all of it, but the vast majority of it I do. I think he's spot on. You know, the EU and the UK let Ukraine down, especially Europe. At the beginning they weren't interested. We hamstrung them all the way. We was quite happy for the Americans to pay for it. When they don't want to pay for it, outrage. How about we look after ourselves, like the Americans say? Great show.
As J.D. Vance made his speech at the Munich Security Conference last week, to much ordure and weeping and gnashing of teeth, you know, the Europeans have basically neglected their own countries, both in terms of the mass immigration which they've allowed to happen, and both in terms of the wastage of money on welfare and on the wrong types of spending by governments, and not spending it on defence. And that is why Europe is now in a very, very poor place when it comes to doing anything about what's happening in Ukraine. And without America, they're pretty much stuck in the middle of the central reservation on a motorway where everything's going past them at a high rate of knots. 0344 499 1000. Coming up, we're going to be talking to Sunil Sharma, political commentator and host of the Rational Voices podcast. We'll also talk about asylum, because right now we've got two stories this morning which show up the ridiculousness of our system. One, a 25-year-old asylum seeker who's been overruled by an immigration tribunal. They say he's a child. The Home Office say he's an adult. More of that to come right here on Morning Glory. Let's get it on. In other news, Jonathan Reynolds is still very much in the firing line. Robert Jenrick from the Tories has called for his resignation, and certainly an investigation into how it's possible for him to have pretended to be a solicitor without facing some kind of criminal charge, because it is, of course, a criminal act to pretend to be a solicitor. It's one of those jobs which is protected. It's like pretending to be a doctor. It's like pretending to be a pilot. You know, these are very important jobs which have public health very much at the centre of them, and being a solicitor is a very, very important job that people are given an awful lot of trust to carry out. And for him to continue to say that he was a solicitor for years and years and years is clearly something that should be taken very seriously. I don't think he's going to last. We've actually now found the clip from Jonathan Reynolds back in the day when he was talking in Parliament. He's now saying, oh yeah, it was only just a slip of the pen that one of my staff put into my LinkedIn profile. Well, have a look at this.
Before the last election, I worked as a solicitor in Manchester city centre, and I would travel in to Manchester every day from what is now my constituency. Yeah, except he didn't. He was a trainee solicitor. Nothing wrong with saying he's a trainee solicitor, but he's obviously exaggerated it to the same point that Rachel Reeves did. Let's talk to Sunil Sharma, who's here right now, political commentator, host of the Rational Voices with Sunil, a podcast. Sunil, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
We'll come back to Russia in a minute, but let's talk about Jonathan Reynolds, because, you know, there he is, plain and simple, in the Houses of Parliament, misleading everyone in there and the rest of the nation by saying, I used to travel into work as a solicitor in an office in Manchester, when he didn't.
I think with Jonathan, similar to Rachel Reeves, I think it just shows the lack of real life experience this cabinet, this administration has. I mean, this is a really good example that they've not really worked in the real world. They've not actually had to go out there and have serious jobs and have had to, do what most people in this country have to do. And so in the end, what they've done is they either lie or exaggerate their actual roles. People would have a lot more respect for them if they were honest about their profile, about their experience, about their history. And I think people would appreciate the fact that they are very unqualified. They are a group of people with not great amount of experience, and that they should probably look for outside help and look for people around them to fill these gaps. Unfortunately, they've not done that. Unfortunately, they've decided to go down the route of just outright lying or exaggerating their roles. And I think that's really, really bad for, at the end of the day, our country, when we have this sort of unqualified group of people. On top of that, people who are prepared to lie and exaggerate their experience.
Absolutely, but in this case, it's actually worse than Rachel Reeves, I think, because if you look at what Robert Jenrick has said, he's basically said that because we've now discovered that the Solicitors Regulatory Authority actually told him to stop claiming that he was a solicitor, that he knew at that point that he was never added to the official roll of solicitors kept by the Solicitors Regulation Authority. He did not qualify. He quit his training early to become an MP, and they wrote to him last month telling him to correct the error in his CV. Now, they've said that they're not taking any further action, but that's presumably because that's been nuanced by Labour, who said, you know, it would be really helpful if you didn't do that. But according to Robert Jenrick, he is very much in a prima facie breach of the Solicitors Act of 1974, which makes it a criminal offence to pretend to be a solicitor. I mean, it's much more serious than sort of exaggerating your job at the Bank of England, isn't it?
For sure, it's a lot worse. This is, you know, being a solicitor, you have the moral authority over people. You obviously have to. A lot of the time, you're in control of people's lives in some situations in terms of what they're going to be doing, whether they through a criminal case, a divorce, a civil case, and this person has clearly lied about it repeatedly. And I think it's a serious offence. And I think it brings, if they don't act, it brings the whole law system of our country into disrepute. You know, what if the solicitors and legal professions are allowing people to lie about their professions, and what does that say for the association in general? You go to a solicitor, to a lawyer, with the belief that they are fully qualified in what they can do. It's the equivalent if you went to a GP and the doctor said, you know, I've completed some of my medical training but not fully.
Right.
You know, you can't give advice like the way you should be unqualified.
No, I mean, if you did that as a doctor and you sat in a GP surgery and said you were a qualified doctor but you'd only done, say, 3 years of medical training, that's an offence.
Yeah.
You know, it's not right.
And he's done the same thing, and I think it should be treated like that. He should be disbarred. They should have to make a statement that they should have. You know, there should be some serious consequences.
He surely can't be business secretary any longer, can he? Surely he has to resign.
Well, I don't know why he's business secretary in the first place. You know, what has being a solicitor or a trainee solicitor has qualified him to become a business secretary in the first place? Forget about even, you know, if you just look across this cabinet, if you look at their qualifications of what they've done, what they've lied about, or even exaggerated, they do not have the qualifications to be running some of the most important issues in this country, whether it's business, finance, trade. These are a group of really inexperienced and incompetent people.
Yeah, absolutely right. But when you look at what's going on in the legal system in this country, again, one of the things that J.D. Vance and Donald Trump have been very critical of in terms of the way that Europe has been running for the last several years, you've got, yes, another 2 cases today. One of them, an immigration tribunal, again, overruling the Home Office to say that a man with a receding hairline and looks as though he is in his mid-20s, possibly as old as 25, they're ruling, no, he says he's under 16, so he must be under 16, therefore we can't name who he is, and therefore he can stay in this country as an unaccompanied child. But let me read you this. This is from Phil, who sent this in a little bit earlier on the text line 87222. My stepdaughter works for the government, and her job is in court trying to deport those that are in the immigration department have deemed deportable. The tears of frustration she has at home because of judges being lenient are at my dinner table many times a week, and they're very real. The stories from her friends in the same department are literally unbelievable. I've suggested she keeps a journal, and it's a sham, and the judges are central to it. And it turns out the judge in this particular case was the same judge who was involved in that controversy just last week when it was claimed that a family from Gaza could come and move here because they had a relative, but it was all done under the Ukrainian refugee program, which was immediately ruled by Keir Starmer to be a loophole that he was going to close.
I mean, it's absolutely absurd. I think in this country we've forgotten the whole point of safeguarding.
Yeah.
I think we saw the issues with safeguarding when we were even talking about biological men competing in women's sports, being in women's spaces. I think we've just really have lost the whole point of safeguarding. With safeguarding, you have to make the assumption that there are going to be some bad actors in this world, that some people who do some bad things. So we have laws and preventative stuff in place to stop that from happening. You cannot run the assumption that everyone is a good person and everyone has good intentions, because then we don't need a police, we don't need prisons, we don't need anything. But the harsh reality is, unfortunately, there are some really bad apples in every form of society. And in this country, we've just completely forgot about the whole point of safeguarding, which is to protect the vast majority of this population. Right. And instead, what we're prepared to do is throw throw all those things out the window for a small, selective minority. And unfortunately, it's not the majority of this country that we're putting, whose interests we're putting first. This is a great example. If you can't verify his age and you can't verify whether this person is a child or a man, then I'm not sure if he should be allowed to claim asylum when it's quite evident that he doesn't exactly display childlike features. And it's really concerning that it's going to keep happening, and I don't see this changing anytime soon. It'd be I'm on the same page as you as the previous message. You said it'd be incredible to listen to that journal, because I'm sure there are so much more worse cases than
well,
this.
there are. I mean, it seems as though there's at least one a week, if not more frequent than that. As well as his physical appearance, it says in the piece in the Telegraph, the Home Office alleged that the asylum seeker had been inconsistent on his knowledge of age, his name, where he was from, and his identity documents. It also claimed he was a calculated person who had attempted to conceal information from them. And they describe him as having a much older looking face than a 16-year-old would have. He had a receding hairline, had been shaving for a while, with thick facial hair, a broad chest, forehead wrinkles and crow's feet. But of course, in our way of thinking in this country, nobody's allowed to actually do any examinations, as they do in other countries in Europe, by the way, of asylum seekers' teeth, because dental examinations can prove age beyond the shadow of a doubt. But we, because we support human rights, are not allowed to do it in this country.
Well, again, I think it's protecting these group of people. It's without actually going against any sort of safeguarding, going against actually what this implications could have for the everyday Brit. It's just at the end of the day, it's this virtual signalling style of just, at the end of the day, Sir Keir Starmer and the Labour cabinet, a lot of people working in these positions for those guys, also, they're unaffected by what happens with the asylum claims. They're unaffected by the illegal migrants coming in. They're unaffected by the boats coming in. So I think they just don't care. They've shown repeatedly that they have a genuine, almost hatred for British culture, British values. So why are they now going to make it harder for asylum claims and asylum issues like this? They're not going to, because I don't think it's really their concern. I don't think Sir Keir Starmer and his cabinet are really worried about this example. They should be worried about this example, just like they should be worried when a judge says that you can use something that's specifically for a certain country and then start to apply it to other countries, because that could start a really, really dangerous precedent across the globe. What's the difference now with some of the civil wars going on in Africa, in Congo, South Sudan, these places? Why can't they use the Ukrainian act as well? It's a really dangerous precedent, and they don't seem to care.
And we don't know yet whether Keir Starmer is going to be a man of his word, which we don't often believe he is, because he says he's going to close the loophole. He's got the Home Office and Yvette Cooper's team looking at closing it, but it doesn't look as if that's actually happened yet, so we don't know even if it will happen. Let's talk quickly about the Work and Pensions Secretary, because Liz Kendall says she wants the Treasury to cut £5 billion out of the welfare budget. That's going to be an interesting one to watch, isn't it? I'm not sure I've got much confidence they're going to do that.
Well, I think, this government, again, it's about cuts and it's about taxing more. There has been nothing from what I've seen on about growing the economy. It's all about cuts and taxes, and anyone worth anything in economics or finance will tell you, you need, the focus should be on growth. We should be growing as an economy rather than being focused on constantly cuts and taxes. In this example, I just wouldn't trust them even with that sums of money, even if they did get the cuts and even if they did get the large sums of money. I just don't have faith in this Labour government, in these profile of people, to go out there and use that money usefully. This money will probably be will be going towards funding a war in which Britain seems more interested in the war continuing than anyone else. So I think it's all well and good saying that we're going to have these cuts and this money coming in back into the hands of the government, but I don't think anyone really trusts this government with any sort of money. So I'm very sceptical whether this will actually happen.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Good to talk to you. Sunil Sharma, thank you very much indeed, political commentator and host of the Rational Voices with Sunil podcast. Just before we go to the next part of the show, let's play another clip from Dan Crenshaw. This is Dan Crenshaw, who is, of course, the Congressman, House of Representatives man from the 2nd District in Texas. He's here in London for an event. He was talking to Harry Cole from The Sun yesterday, right here in this very building. Here's what he had to say about the situation going on with Vladimir Putin.
you have to at least try this avenue. You can't, now we shouldn't you shouldn't make a win for Putin here.
Yeah.
You can't create a situation where there's a win.
I think that's what's baffling people at the moment.
Yeah,
but what was the sacrifice for 3 years?
Well, sure, but what I tell Europeans is if you don't like that outcome, then be more threatening so that negotiation goes better. You know, whether you're in a bar fight or whether you're in an international conflict, the framework is the same. You have to out-crazy the other, which means you have to win in the escalation dominance ladder. So Europeans need to help by being in the background of those negotiations, saying, if this doesn't work, we're going to take further action that you're not going to like. Now, that's a very uncomfortable thing for Europeans to do, but it's very necessary. And so, I tell the Germans, for instance, were finger wagging at us a lot in the Munich Security Conference.
We get that a lot as well.
and I was like, if you want a better outcome, then act more aggressively. I realize that's uncomfortable for you. There's a history there. But if you don't do that, if you're always waiting for America to lead you on your own continent, well, it's not going to work.
And those are some pretty wise words, I think, and pretty fair words. I mean, people in this country and in Europe who are getting, as I say, all hot and bothered by the way that Donald Trump is predicating all of his comments about Zelensky, about Putin, about the war in Ukraine. They have unfortunately been in a position where they could perhaps have put pressure in one way, shape or form, but they didn't want to. And so now we are where we are. And I think that's what we have to say. One here from Michelle in Altrincham. She says, this great show, Mike. Keir Starmer and his lying excuse of a government are completely unfit for purpose. They have no idea what they're doing, lurching from one disaster to the next. It's beyond frustrating watching them make a mess of everything while pretending they have a plan. The country deserves so much better. Also, I completely agree with Donald Trump on the Ukraine situation. This war needs to end, and we shouldn't be endlessly throwing money at it without a real strategy for peace. And I think that is a feeling that many people have in this country, and certainly many people have in the United States, and probably lots of people have in Europe as well. The way that the governments have been run in Europe for a long time have been very, very useless for those of us who have been criticising them for a very long time. One of the reasons we wanted to leave the European Union was because it was an organisation that was not really fit for purpose and was anti-business, was anti-independent nations, anti the growth of individual states, and more about sort of collectively doing things together. Well, that hasn't worked because we've ended up with a war in Ukraine, which now needs to end. We'll talk coming up some more about the immigration problems. Harjap Singh, immigration lawyer, is going to join us. So it's 21 minutes past 7.
He used his mum's ID. He was ordering them in a period of 6 months, so he was actually harbouring loads of weapons into his home. He went to his local post office, didn't get ID, didn't get any checks, collected the weapon, went on later that day and took my brother's life. We are trying to do everything we possibly can to make it harder, to put in more barriers for the future, and to not allow weapons that are clearly just being designed to seriously harm and murder people to be allowed to be sold freely.
UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 24 minutes past 7. This, of course, is the home of common sense, the one place where you get the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. We're about to see the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages being handed over by Hamas to the Israeli authorities. It's the entire family, the Bibas family that we've spoken about before, as well as 84-year-old Oded Lifshitz, currently underway over there in Gaza. It's the usual horrible scene of these ghastly individuals covered in black face masks and wearing Hamas headbands and carrying automatic weapons. It's, of course, the 2 children, as well as their mother, Shiri Ariel and Kafir Bibas. Their coffins were paraded on stage in what can only be described as a pretty ghastly and macabre kind of scene. Absolutely awful. I don't think Hamas are going to be doing themselves any PR favours again here by the way they're doing this, but we'll bring you up to date with that as it happens, as those coffins are finally repatriated back to their home nation. It's a very sad day. Awful day, really. Israel confirmed late yesterday that the family and indeed the children had been killed as well. Let's talk now, though, to Harjap Singh, because we were just before talking about a couple of cases in the immigration, the sort of panel judges scenario, where yet again there's been a case of somebody who supposedly is older than 16, but has been overruled. The Home Office has been overruled by an immigration panel judge to say that, oh no, we're not sure that he is over 16, so we'll just continue to believe that he is in fact under 16. There seems to be a lot of news coming out right now about these immigration tribunals. Harjap, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
I mean, I don't know why there's more news coming out on these. I'm sure you'll tell me this has been going on for time immemorial, and these panels have been held for donkey's years. But why suddenly all this scrutiny on them, do you think?
I think it's just the way the media is, and it's just the whole anti-immigration rhetoric at the moment. It's more scrutiny on it. There's more. It's an election issue. Labour were elected on it as well, and people want to see action, even though they're getting it at the moment. They perhaps feel, well, hold on, it's not enough.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There is always going to be scrutiny on an issue which has become, sort of front and centre of an awful lot of people's concerns, I suppose you might say. Not just since the election, but before that as well. I mean, what are you making of the way Labour are doing what they're doing? They're saying that they're deporting a lot more people than the Tories did. Why are the lawyers not trying to stop them deporting these people like they used to?
Well, in regards to Labour, the public wanted less people coming in and more people being sent back. And that's what Labour are doing. The figures support that. Labour are doing that much better than what the last government did. In fact, maybe even threefold than what the government did. So less visas are being issued this year and the end of last year, and more people are being sent back. In fact, since Labour have come in since July, about 19,000 people have come in. The lawyers and the judges are there to make sure that the law is upheld and that to the letter of the law. That the government does not break the rules and that the rights of people are not ignored and that it works within a framework. Now, if the government doesn't like the law, then it's up to the government to change it. However, what the government can't do is break its own laws that it introduces. Just in a similar, it wouldn't when it's an employment tribunal, just as it wouldn't, if you got fired from your job or, if you got an unfair parking ticket. So it's down to the government to adjust the laws to make sure that they fit in with the promises that they made and make sure that they're not overriding them or that they're not ignoring people's rights.
But the problem is the human rights law, isn't it? I mean, that's the one that seems to be the one that continually is used to do things which say right-thinking people might think was wrong. For example, what law covers whether or not somebody's a child? If it comes down to somebody sitting on an immigration tribunal panel and saying, I don't think he's as a child, or the Home Office says, we don't think he's a child, but then the judge says, actually, well, I do think he's a child, what law is that?
Well, once again, the law that's prescribed, the procedures that are prescribed, and the judge follows them and makes sure that the Home Office has done that. Now, the Home Office might need to change its procedures. We know, Mike, how many years have we been speaking on that the Home Office is a total mess. It's not fit for purpose. Every year, MPs get together and tell us. It doesn't matter what government's in, they tell us that this is a machinery that's not fit for purpose. And despite human rights laws being around and the ECHR being around, Labour have managed to send 19,000 people back. Now, the argument was by the previous government,
but that number's unclear, isn't it? It's not clear who those 19,000 people are because they won't tell us. And many of them are not being removed forcibly. Many of them are going because they want to go or because they're being encouraged to go.
One thing is clear, they didn't have a right to be here. So they've gone. Before they were staying here and still not being sent back or not deciding to go
back. But there's
a
lot more than 19,000 people who have no right to be here still, who are still here.
Of course. And it's impossible to suggest that 1.5 million people are going to be rounded up and sent back. There'll have to be some sort of compromise in relation to perhaps allowing people to work or, seeing who's been here for a long time. There's people who've been here 18, 19 years, Mike, without any paperwork. And, so they would say they're assimilated. Labour would say, well, hold on, no, you don't have a right to be here. But the fact is, Labour have sent these people back. The Conservatives could have, but they didn't for some reason.
The Conservatives tried to send people back quite often, and they were stopped by lawyers. Sometimes those lawyers involved Keir Starmer.
Well, those same lawyers are still about. The same judges are still about.
But they're not stopping it now, are they? You don't see stories any longer about lawyers stopping people from getting on planes and dragging people off planes. It doesn't happen anymore. Why? I can only concede that because the Labour government's doing it.
No, actually, that still happens. The fact is, the focus is now on small boats. First, it was on work visas, which Labour have slashed down. It was on dependents of care home and student visas, which Labour have cracked down on. Then it was about the lack of people.
It was actually the Tory government that changed the rules on coming in. So Labour have cracked down on a rule that were brought in by the Tories. I don't really care who brought the rules in. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Yeah, but if they wanted to, they could have reversed it. And if they were pro-immigration and they wanted to, but they didn't. So they're carrying on that policy, and they've made it a lot more harder. They've made little tweaks here and there, which make it harder. And it's going to become harder again. They've raised minimum incomes, and they've raised and they've maintained the spouse visa requirements. So the fact is, Labour could have done a lot of things to reverse it. It hasn't. It's gone with its policy. They have got a better record than the Conservatives. But now the focus is on small boats, because that's the only thing that they haven't managed to control. So the fact is they've managed to control everything else. The agenda now is small boats. Can they control this? They're working to smash small gangs. Yeah, it doesn't at the moment.
25,000 have come already. It doesn't look like it at all.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it at the moment, Mike. But let's see. Let's give them time. Let's see where we are in 6 months' time. See if they've made a difference, and see
if their
policies are working.
What would your advice be to them to stop the boats?
My advice would be to work closer with Europe, offer them a better incentive, which perhaps hasn't worked out, but also realise that...
We've already given Europe loads of money, though, haven't we?
Yeah, and to get these gangs and get the traffickers at the source, really, at the source, and also perhaps not to help in a displacement of people in the first place. Stop selling weapons to countries which are making people homeless. I mean, it's quite simple.
Well,
you can't profit. Well, you can't profit from arms sales to countries, and then once reduce millions of people's homes to rubble, and then say, sorry, got no space for you at the InGov.
Well, I don't think we were selling any arms to Syria, but that's another question. What do you make of?
We are selling arms to countries which are making people homeless, though, and we're profiting from the sales for that.
We may well be.
Yeah, we are.
We may well be. What do you make of Jonathan Reynolds pretending to be a solicitor? I mean, you're a solicitor. He's been rebuked by the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, and Robert Jenrick says that he's probably got a prima facie breach of the Solicitors Act of 1974 and the Legal Services Act of 2007, which make it a criminal offence to pretend to be a solicitor.
Yeah, well, it is an offence. Technically, it is an offence. It's up to authorities to charge them. If that had been me or you, Mike, we might have been treated differently. We could have been looking at fines. We might have been looking at jail time.
Yeah.
People have been jailed for providing legal services.
He can't possibly stay in the cabinet, can he?
It's down to Keir Starmer. But if people have been fired for a lot less, right? So Louise Haigh got fired, I think, unfairly for a lot less than that. But
well, she had a conviction for fraud, which actually was a conviction. So that's not.
Yeah, it was. But then once again, what is this? This is a potential breach of a Solicitors Act, right?
Well, so but it's a criminal offence, though, nonetheless. I mean, we can't have a government full of criminals, can we?
If we're holding it to Louise Haigh standards, or people have been expelled from the party, or had the whip removed for just making statements, then we've got to definitely have a look at someone who's Why? Why was the need, Mike? Why to hold yourself out to be... It's the whole image, isn't it? Showing that you're an academic, you've attained something, you're a professional, hoping to add credibility to your CV. I mean, that's what it is, right?
I mean, personally, it wouldn't be something I'd want to admit to be honest, Harjap, but, you know, that's just me.
Listen, prayer sins, Mike, prayer sins.
But listen, he's you know, I don't understand why people would fake a CV. I've never understood that. It tells me something about their character, but I'm glad you agree with me that it is an offence, but thank you very much indeed. Harjap Singh, immigration lawyer and solicitor, basically, who says, you know, Reynolds shouldn't be in the job. He should not be a cabinet minister any longer. He cannot be the business secretary. He's committed an offence. He's pretended to be something he's not, and that thing he was pretending to be was actually a solicitor. This from Robert in Hitchin says, as a 25-year-old, Mike, I want to apologise to the rest of Gen Z. My time in school was hell, literally being bullied by students and teachers about supporting Brexit and not Jeremy Corbyn. It's very, very frustrating to be surrounded by lazy, entitled lefties. I can tell you, Robert, exactly why that's a big problem. But good luck to you and well done for standing up to them. Very well played indeed. It's 7:35. Coming up, we're going to be speaking to Roxanne Hoge, who's the chair of the Republican Party in Los Angeles, California. All coming up.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 7:36. I'm Mike Graham. Quinn in Rotherhithe says this: has anyone else noticed we only hear about the Ukraine war when their president has his begging bowl out for our money, with no mention of how and when he will pay it back? Sharon from Staffordshire says, why are all these other MPs that we taxpayers are paying for letting this happen? Our country needs our money to help our people. Well, this is on the news that on the front page of the Daily Mirror today. We've got Keir Starmer pledging yet more money to Ukraine, even as Donald Trump is basically saying, you know, we can't just keep paying for something which we have no idea about what is going on. To Ukraine with love, it says, we confirm a £4.5 billion fight fund as Britain apparently is going to press ahead with taxpayers' money going to pay for a war which, as we said before, appears to have no apparent end. Let's talk now to Roxanne Hoge, who's the chair of the Republican Party in Los Angeles. Roxanne, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Appreciate you staying up late for us. Donald Trump seems to be upsetting quite a lot of people over here in Europe at the moment. I'm all in favour of it, to be honest, because, you know, we have had governments both in this country and in other European countries which have neglected an awful lot of things, including the defence of their own nations, which they should have been keeping a closer eye on, really.
Your commenters are absolutely spot on. The fact is, the whole situation with Ukraine, and in fact, NATO, is a bit like lending some money to a family member that's down on their luck, and then the next thing you know, you see them with a nice new suit of clothes going out to dinner all the time. And you think, what did I give you money for then?
Yeah. Well, there doesn't seem to be an awful lot of, shall we say, accounting that's been done on the money that's been given. I mean, hundreds of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of pounds, hundreds of billions of euros have gone into this this effort. And, you know, many of us here also can be slightly critical of Donald Trump when he calls Zelensky a dictator and says that, you know, he started the war. you know, some of the things Donald Trump says, I think, are just said for effect and for you know, for shock value. But his main point is right, isn't it?
Well, it is. And if you read his book, The Art of the Deal, he says hyperbole is a tactic that he loves to use. But Zelensky himself played into it by wearing a costume for the past 3 years. If you notice, he seems to have lost all his suits. And the fact is, he hasn't been the most supportive of free speech or of the rights of, say, churches in Ukraine to operate. So there's a point to be made, and Donald Trump is making it in his inimitable way.
Right. Are you worried that he's been a bit too friendly to Vladimir Putin, or do you think that's some kind of a tactic?
I think it's all tactics. So it comes down to what your commenter said, and what we've all noticed is that our leaders are supposed to be responsible for their own countries. And if money did grow on trees, this would be fabulous. But the people I know who work basically, you know, halfway through the year to just cover their tax burden, to find out that it's just been going in unbelievable amounts and maybe not even getting to Ukraine is a bit too much to take.
Right. Well, when you see some of the monies that have been dispersed during the Biden administration, and we've got the same problems here in the UK in terms of foreign aid and the kinds of, you know, ridiculously weird and wonderful projects that get subsidised by British taxpayers and by American taxpayers, it's hard to believe that they're doing this with our money. Let's have a quick look at Donald Trump speaking last night in Miami about some of the stuff that Doge has discovered.
Concept where we give 20% of the Doge savings to American citizens and 20% goes to paying down debt, because the numbers are incredible, Elon. So many billions of dollars, billions, hundreds of billions, and we're thinking about giving 20% back to the American citizens and 20% down to pay back debt.
I mean, this is a thing that's happened here as well, where the governments have got so big and so kind of, you know, big-headed as well, if you like, that they've taken our money, they haven't consulted us, and they've started giving it away. And I mean, it's hard to believe that anyone would be in favour of that.
Well, they're very much in favor of it because they've all done very well. These are the same people who told millions of us that we could not go to work, our children could not go to school, we could not leave the house, and yet they were living it up really large on the hog and having a fabulous time and being very well paid for it. So if they're upset, I'm glad about that.
Yeah, I mean, and how is it all going down in America? Because I've got friends and family in America that I speak to quite a lot. They tell me what they see and what they hear. I mean, as far as the clamp down on all of this government waste, the clamp down on some government departments that have, where buildings have been locked and they've thrown people out and said, we'll let you back in when we figure out whether you're somebody worth employing. How is that going down with the sort of the general public as opposed to just Trump fans?
Well, this is how you know they've lost the plot, when he's got them arguing against cutting waste and fraud. And while in America writ large, people are very happy. I do live in Los Angeles, so I'm a little bit behind the blue curtain.
Yeah.
And there are people who are just in an absolute tizzy. Oh, this is not how you should do it. You should what? Just burn money and see how it all turns out? The only way to get to zero-based budgeting is to cut radically right away and to get it done.
Which is music to my ears. We don't get that in this country. Even when we had a Conservative government, they come in and they tell you you're going to do something. I mean, believe it or not, Boris Johnson, for all of his good points, came in 2019 and said they were going to cut net migration down to 20,000 a year. And last year, the figure was closer to 1 million. You know, it's not even a factor of 10 that it's been increased by. I mean, it's just absolutely and utterly out of control. And immigration, obviously, is something that's a big problem in America as well. That's also being addressed. So, I mean, it's quite remarkable, really, for me, that Donald Trump really hasn't even been in a month yet.
Well, I think the left is starting to realize what an epic mistake they made by calling a timeout on a game. If Donald Trump had continued on in his 4 years, in his second term, you know, he would never have cracked the code. But they gave him a timeout. He went back to the locker room, studied their playbook, rested up, took a couple shots of steroids, and he's back at it with a vengeance.
Right. And he's got Elon Musk on side, which must be a big help. They obviously seem to be getting on terribly well at the moment. I mean, it's a very different Donald Trump than the one that came into power in 2016, don't you think? I mean, he's a much more kind of politically mature individual, it seems to me. Seems to me he knows much more about the inside workings of the Beltway and Washington, D.C. He fell out with quite a lot of people in his own side in the first term. Do you think he'll do that in this one as well?
Well, as long as people on his own side are attempting to keep the gravy train going for themselves and to keep pretending that they're solving problems that they have no intention of solving, of course he's going to make them upset. We have all seen across the pond and here, and I'm a Commonwealth girl originally from Jamaica, so I've seen it as well, where everyone pretends to be in this marvelous play where they're opposing each other and then they all go out for a drink of an evening. Yeah. But the truth is, he's really doing the work for the American people that needed to be done. Yes, indeed. But I'm thinking, I suppose, specifically about Elon Musk and he. Will their sort of bromance continue to flourish, do you think? I think it will, because they've put an actual end date on it, right? This isn't a sort of, oh, let's just keep going and see where this ends up. I mean, there's going to be a sunset for the Doge team. Right. And when is that? I think it's 18 months. He's given him 18 months. Right. He's going gangbusters. Yeah. Well, he's going to save them a lot of money. And there he was just talking earlier about possibly giving them 20% back to the taxpayers of all that money. Let's finish up with one final clip on him telling people how much money he might be able to make for them.
I come today with a simple message for business leaders from all across the nation and all around the world. If you want to build the future, push boundaries, unleash breakthroughs, transform industries, and make a fortune, because you want to make a fortune. Most of you have already made a fortune. I don't want to say that. There's no better place on earth than the current and future United States of America under a certain president named Donald J. Trump. I think that you're going to do very well. And so, finally, what do you think is going to happen with this whole Russian-US peace deal? I mean, what do you hope will happen? What do you think will happen, Roxanne? Look what Donald Trump achieved in the Middle East in his first term, and even just coming back to office now. If there's anybody who can broker a deal, it would be President Donald J. Trump. Okay. Roxanne Hoge, thank you very much indeed. Chair of the Republican Party, Los Angeles, via Jamaica, she tells us. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can voice note us there as well via WhatsApp. Let's get one from Jay.
Morning, Mike. Jay from Coventry. Just a quick note to say that I'm a qualified chef. Does that mean that I can work for government in cooking the books? Got more experience than they have at cooking. Maybe I might make a better job of it. Cheers, mate. Bye. You may well have much more experience of cooking, but cooking the books, I think, is their speciality, because that's what they keep doing. They're telling us right now they're going to save £5 billion out of the welfare budget. I'm not quite sure where they're going to find that from. And meanwhile, you've got people like Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, who says he knows a lot about business, having never worked in business, and who says he was a solicitor when he wasn't. Brilliant, isn't it? 7:47.
It is ridiculous for any democratic politicians or even citizens to discuss any words of Vladimir Putin about democracy and elections. Vladimir Zelensky is a legitimate president of Ukraine. Myself is a legitimate member of the parliament of Ukraine. We have 1 million people in the Ukrainian army. We have 7 million internal replaced persons. We have not less than 5 million adults in Europe. How you can conduct elections, meaning democratic elections?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 7:49, with you all the way through until 10 o'clock, of course. And we are talking a great many things this morning, including a lot of international stories, of course, because we've got the Donald Trump situation going on with Vladimir Putin. We've got Vladimir Zelensky responding and saying, you know, it's not right to say that I'm a dictator, and it's not right to say that I haven't held any elections because there's been a war going on, etc., etc., etc. We're going to talk to Peter Hitchens about that coming up. Marco says this: I think Donald Trump is absolutely right to question Zelensky on where all his money has gone. He is a businessman and understands the value of money, unlike our government, who completely don't understand the value of money and spend it all on stupid, woke, pointless projects all over the world, leaving their own citizens freezing and starving. What a stupid bunch of overpaid idiots we have running this country. Well, I think a lot of people are rather shocked at how badly they are running this country. But let's take another look overseas as well today, because something going on at the moment in Gaza, Hamas handing over the bodies, the dead bodies, I'm afraid, of an entire family who have been held hostage. Nobody really knows exactly when they passed away, but they've been involved in what can only be described as a ghastly kind of handing over process, which involved parading the coffins of the mother and her 2 children, and also an elderly gentleman who they took hostage on October the 7th back in 2003. Fleur Hassan Nahum is here with us now, Special Envoy for the Israeli Foreign Ministry, former Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem as well. Fleur, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
It's a very sombre and terribly sad day, this, and pretty disgraceful the way that that this procedure is ongoing. I mean, we didn't show the earlier part when the coffins were being paraded. We just thought it was too horrible and disgusting. But we see on the screen now the usual scene of Red Cross cars carrying the coffins back towards the Israeli handover. I don't know what to say, really. It's so awful. It's hard to find words, isn't it?
It's really hard to find words. This is a very, very sad morning here in Israel. I tweeted earlier that even the skies are crying. It's a rainy day, windy, cold. It's almost like they're reflecting the national mood. You know, for a long time we suspected that this mother and her 2 babies, just want to remind everybody, Hamas kidnapped a 9-month-old baby and his 3-year-old brother and their mother from their homes, and they kept them in dungeons. Their father was also kidnapped. He came out 2 weeks ago, and you know, Hamas love their propaganda, but even this ceremony was too much for the Red Cross, who are always there, always take part. And this time, even they said in a first, we can't do this. We can't take part in this farcical ceremony on stage. I wish they would have done the same thing and held their ground when they were parading the 3 hostages that looked like Holocaust survivors with certificates that they themselves signed and goodie bags that they handed over. But apparently this one was the red line for the Red Cross. Israeli media, like you, decided not to broadcast what was going on in Gaza, not to give this any to give this any oxygen. But here we are. Now they're being taken by the Red Cross, as you said. They're going to be taken to forensics. And at some point, the families will give them the burial that they deserved. It's horrible.
And it's not even clear really when they died, is it?
No, it's not clear when they died. They could well have been dead from the first few months. And actually, my suspicion is they died pretty early on because last November, when we did the first hostage deal with them, all the mothers, there were many more children that they kidnapped, and all the mothers and all the children, some of them as young as 5 and 4, came out at that point. And the fact that Shiri, Ariel, and Kfir didn't come out at that point was pretty significant in the sense that it pointed to the fact that they were already not with us. So this is what we have. This is who Hamas are, and it's still incredible to me, Mike, how people are still making equivalence between the terrorists with blood on their hands that are being released so that we can get back 2 dead babies, their mother, and an old man.
Yeah, I think aside from the sort of the crazy pro-Palestinian marchers who march on our streets pretty much every weekend, I think ordinary people who might have seen some equivalence because they thought they should be fair, I think are less likely now to see that.
I don't know, Mike. When they took out the hostages that looked like Holocaust survivors, the emaciated hostages, the mainstream media like CNN and Hamas spent the week doing CNN and BBC, Freudian slip. They spend the week doing damage limitation for the Hamas propaganda, saying that the prisoners also looked emaciated, even though they couldn't come up with one picture of any prisoner that didn't look like he'd had 3 square meals a day. So there you have it.
Well, they did come up, I think, with one, but it turns out he was a cancer
He was
sufferer,
a cancer sufferer that we were
they
treating.
didn't declare.
Exactly, they didn't declare it. So there we have it.
Right. Well, BBC are in more trouble here at the moment because they put out a documentary at the beginning of this week in which they had the sort of the main protagonist of the documentary, supposedly a young boy who was a victim of Israeli aggression. Turns out his dad is in part of the Hamas government.
Yes, I saw that. And it's just incredible.
They forgot to mention it. They say they didn't know.
No, it's worse than that, Mike. They actually interviewed his so-called father in the documentary, which wasn't his father at all. So they didn't check their sources. How many mistakes can you make?
I know.
Until you start to realize that there's an agenda here.
Yeah, exactly right. And a shocking agenda. So what happens next? What's the next sort of phase of this? I know there's phase 2 is being sort of negotiated. So what's the situation?
Well, so the end of phase 1, and maybe that'll lift everybody's spirits a little bit, is that on Saturday, the last 6 living hostages from phase 1 will be coming out on Saturday. The Hamas wanted to drag it out 3 and 3, and I actually think it's Donald Trump's pressure. He said, well, why are you drab-drabbing it? So the 6th are coming out on Saturday morning. We'll see what state they're in.
Right.
And then the question is, at the moment, do they extend this phase and we keep releasing more prisoners with blood on their hands for more living hostages, or do they begin the second stage of the hostage release? And that's what they're talking about now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we don't know really still even how many more hostages are alive or not.
Well, they think that there's about another 30 alive from the 60-odd that are left.
Right.
They think that around half are alive. So that's still pretty significant.
Right. And I find it very difficult I sometimes wonder what it must be like to be one of those hostages who clearly don't have any information at all. Many of them don't have any sunlight. They're in these horrible tunnels. They've been there for more than 500 days. I mean, you can't really quite imagine what that would be like.
Well, absolutely. And the thing is that the hostages that are coming out are actually telling us what's going on there. So it's worse. So there's a boy whose mother comes out in the Israeli media the whole time crying, as she should. Her son is lost an eye, and he's been tied up in a tunnel for 15 months.
Right.
Another boy who's American, he has dual citizenship, who's basically wounded and been taking care of his own wounds. So we never know, but it's not good. The ones that are left are not in good condition.
No, of course. Well, listen, we wish you well as ever, Fleur. Thank you for talking to us. I know it's a very difficult day. Fleur Hassan Nahum there talking to us, a former Jerusalem deputy mayor and now special envoy for the Israeli Foreign Ministry. Just awful to look at those pictures. The 4 bodies having been now taken out from the tunnels. Nobody knows when they died. 2 children, one only 9 months old when he was kidnapped. The other only 4 years old when he was kidnapped. Absolutely incredibly awful, isn't it? Just doesn't bear thinking about. Jessica says this from Dover. That immigration expert you had on is very pro-Labour. Out of interest, are there any right-of-centre immigration lawyers? Shouldn't they all be politically neutral? Well, you'd like to think so. A very worrying left-wing bias seems to be polluting the whole legal system, from legal aid lawyers through to judges. Absolutely right. That is part of the problem. And Els Bells in Shropshire says this: these immigration judges and lawyers are out of line. What are these upper and lower immigration tribunals? What a load of bloody nonsense. The immigration system as a whole is working constantly against this country and its citizens. Enough is enough. We don't want them, and it's time we come together to stand up and put a stop to it once and for all. If you don't like that, well, tough. It's our country and we want it back. I think that's a fair statement to make. Obviously, of course, I haven't even got into yet the second immigration story today, which is all about a Syrian refugee who came to this country and claims, his barrister claims, that he's suffering from PTSD, so he can't go to prison despite the fact that he molested a young woman on the streets of Bournemouth after he was driving around at 3 o'clock in the morning looking for young women to molest. For heaven's sake. Peter Hitchens coming next. This is Morning Glory. See you after the news.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened. I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
Time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. The shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, or far ball, slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No. There's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia. These are the missiles that Biden has approved for the use by Ukraine.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 8. I'm Mike Graham, with you all the way through until 10, of course. We're halfway through the show. We've got lots going on. All the front pages this morning, pretty much without exception, have got Trump and Zelensky and a variation of it on there. The Financial Times, Trump calls Zelensky a dictator. Trump's attack on dictator Zelensky, says the Telegraph. Trump appalls world with dictator blast, says the Mail. And shameful Trump attack stuns world, says the Daily Express. Meanwhile, the Mirror says Britain prepares a £4.5 billion fund for more money to Ukraine, despite what Donald Trump says. And we've got Keir Starmer in the Times saying Zelensky is no dictator. The bottom line for me is that this is all about the way that Donald Trump apparently likes to operate, the way that he likes to upset the apple cart, the way that he's telling Europe that you should have done more to look after your own defences over time instead of allowing them to become redundant, and instead spending all your money on welfare budgets and immigrants. I think he's got a very good point there. People are universally condemning Donald Trump for calling Zelensky a dictator and for having a go at him for not having any elections. However, as ever, this story is not cut and dried. It is not black and white. It's not good and bad. It's not, good versus evil. It's not just Putin bad and Zelensky good. There's an awful lot of nuance to it. Peter Hitchens is coming up to talk to us about it. I'm sure he'll have a very interesting view on what is being said and how it is being said and where it all ends up at the end of the day. 0344 499 1000. Let's get a voice note from Richard.
Hi, mate. Richard from Telford. A few points about Ukraine. Actually, Trump is correct. Zelensky is a dictator. His democratic mandate, where he was elected president, ran out some time ago, and he's been governing under martial law. There's also a lot of allegations about the amount of property that he owns in different countries. And finally, Ukraine is actually losing on the battlefield. If we don't get peace soon, then Russia's going to be pushing on towards Kyiv, and none of us want that to happen. So for goodness sake, let's get some serious peace talks going. Let's stop the virtue signalling from our political class, and let's stop the killing as soon as we can. Thanks, Mike. Great show, but let's just get some truth out there.
Richard, thank you very much indeed. Sometimes the truth is hard to find, but we are always seeking it here at Morning Glory and here at Talk, of course, the home of common sense, and we'll try and bring it to you as much as we possibly can. Peter Hitchens has always said that peace is surely the end result of the best endeavours of everybody in this particular scenario. 0344 499 1000 is the number. It's 8:05. This is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. Rob says this: I've never understood why the rank-and-file people of the UK have got behind Ukraine. Maybe it's because we have been brainwashed into hating Russia. Like Chagos, the Ukraine was not known to UK people until it became news, and we now treat them like old friends, and they are not. And when we wake up to this, perhaps we will make better decisions. Ukraine wants to be part of the EU, and if that's the case, let the EU cartel fund and resource them. I see no reason why we should fund them as we are doing. For whatever reason, we would be better to increase our own defence budget by billions than give it to the Ukraine. I think a lot of people would agree with that. Let's talk to Peter Hitchens and see what he makes of it all. Peter, very good morning.
Good morning.
Where to begin? I mean, I suppose it would be pointless to ask you what you think of Donald Trump's intervention here, because, I mean, everybody can see what Donald Trump is doing. The question is he doing something that will work, I suppose?
Well, we know, don't we, that he likes to do these disruptive things. Yeah. He might equally well have said that he wanted to turn Crimea into a world holiday resort run by himself. Right. It would have the same effect of just making people follow his agenda in what comes, because now he's disrupted totally the idea that Volodymyr Zelensky is a sort of new Churchill by calling him a dictator. I mean, even though he obviously is not a dictator, in fact, rather the reverse. Poor old Zelensky has for some time been a manipulated puppet of much more powerful forces in Ukraine. Remember, Volodymyr Zelensky was elected as a peace president and tried, to his great credit, for some time to achieve peace, and was completely frustrated by forces in his own country, including his predecessor, Petro Poroshenko, and the ultra-nationalists. So to call him a dictator is obviously absurd, but he isn't that. and it's not unreasonable for a country in the middle of being invaded to suspend elections, as has been many times pointed out.
Yeah.
This country suspended elections during the Second World War. That's not unusual or particularly bad. But just what Trump has done is he's started people thinking about, well, obviously Zelensky is not a dictator, but what exactly is he?
Yeah.
And what has Ukraine been doing to achieve peace over the past several years? And how did this combat originate? What he can't say, or won't say, or perhaps doesn't know, and referring here to President Trump, is that this war was really ultimately the creation of an American decision to push NATO relentlessly eastwards, despite the repeated warnings of Russia that they weren't ultimately prepared to tolerate this. People will, I have to add here, people will now say, oh, you're excusing the Russian invasion. I'm not. The Russian invasion was not just unlawful, stupid, but also morally wrong and has covered Ukraine in blood. And I don't defend it or excuse it, but I'm saying it was to some extent provoked. And it was, to some extent, the result of Western policy, particularly the 2008 Bucharest summit, at which George W. Bush, the genius of Iraq, proposed that Ukraine should become a member of NATO. And for most of the problems which have come about have followed from an American decision to pursue a very aggressive foreign policy in that part of the world. And here we are. Yeah. So if Donald Trump is now abandoning that policy, which even from the American, the baffling thing about the policy of the United States towards Russia, really since then, is that it actually hasn't done the United States any good. It hasn't done Europe any good. It certainly hasn't done Ukraine any good. Ukraine is a devastated mess at the moment. Its economy in ruins, very little electrical power, many people dead, huge numbers of young men maimed, and many people have fled. Many of the best people in Ukraine have fled the country rather than stay. So it's been a disaster for them. None of these things are good. So anybody who says, let's bring an end to this stupid mayhem and start reconstructing Ukraine surely has a point. But it's obvious Zelensky is not a dictator, but I would like people to think, and your contributor, whose words you quoted at the beginning of this exchange, seems to be speaking very good sense. Why is it that the British people have somehow been recruited into becoming Ukrainian super patriots?
Yeah.
What is it? What is Britain's interest in Ukraine? What has it ever been? Right. What will it be? There's no historic connection between us and them, nor do I see any particular British interest in this region. What are we doing there? And I don't understand it. And now the Americans, who are the progenitors of this, in my view, totally unnecessary and disastrous combat, now they're pulling out. Why should Britain and the rest of the European nations be saying, okay, well, in that case, we'll carry it on? Yeah. I am genuinely baffled as to the thought process which leads people to say, well, now the people who really, really wanted this fight have pulled out of it, as the United States almost invariably does pull out of its foreign engagements. Now they've pulled out of it, we should keep it going.
Yeah.
I don't remember anybody saying when the Americans pulled out of Vietnam, oh, well, let's send lots of British troops in.
No, exactly right. And also the other thing that's been pointed out this last sort of 24 hours or so is that, people say, oh, America's abandoning Europe. People say, well, hang on a minute. They didn't really come into the Second World War until Pearl Harbor happened. They didn't really come into the First World War until 1917. They haven't always stood absolutely full square for the beginning of every single war that's happened in Europe.
It's not their job. Why should they?
No, quite. I'm not arguing against that.
There's another country, and when they acted in the First World War, a lot of their decisions were based on the fact they lent so much money to Britain. They didn't want to lose it if we went under, so they thought they better make sure we won, which is, again, not unreasonable. I don't criticize them for it, nor do I criticize them for their extremely stringent behavior towards us in 1939-40, when they pretty much made us hold a bankruptcy hearing before they'd give us Lend-Lease. It's not a sentimental relationship. The Americans don't engage in Europe because they love us all so much and they like coming to Paris. The Americans engage in Europe because a stable Europe is good for American politics and diplomacy. And what they have discovered, it seems to me, in this conflict is that pushing NATO this far east does not have the effect of creating a stable Europe or an economically prosperous Europe. On the contrary, it has destabilized Europe quite gravely and is not doing anybody any good. And if Donald Trump can see that, then it's to his credit, even if the rest of what he says is bilge.
Yes, indeed. And I mean, interesting piece in the Telegraph today by Alistair Heath, in which he talks about, you know, if Keir Starmer was a real patriot and he really cared about the security of the West, he would tear up his entire agenda. He would announce a rearmament programme a la 1934 and the reconstruction of a homegrown military-industrial chain. He would get rid of the leftist nonsense about net zero, and he would drastically increase the size of the armed forces. But, of course, he's not going to do any of those things.
Well, he's not, and I doubt whether any British government would or could do those things, because the effects on the levels of taxation on the economy of ramping up military spending in that way without any other general rearrangement of our priorities would be enormously burdensome on the population and very, very hard to get through once people saw the cost.
Yeah.
We did indeed rearm after 1934, and it cost a great deal of money, and it was fortunate that we did, and the much reviled Neville Chamberlain was responsible, of course, for the creation of the modern Royal Air Force, and the Spitfires wouldn't have been there in 1939-40 if it hadn't been for Chamberlain's very considerable military spending and naval spending. But that's another era. What we've had established here, it seems to me, is this extraordinary split mind between the people who are so anxious for us to be a war in Ukraine. They say simultaneously, the Russians are this most terrible threat. If we don't stop them in Ukraine before we know where they are, they'll be in Dover. And the same people say, but then look at these Russians, they're incompetent, their army can barely move an inch. It takes them months of offensive to gain a few yards in the Don Basin. Their army is incompetent, they can't get recruits, they have to rely on North Korea. Well, which is true?
Yeah.
Is it true that they're poised, they're a vast and competent military power poised to sweep across Europe? Or is it true that they are, it seems to me to be demonstrated by this war, a fairly minor conventional power with very limited resources, very limited manpower, and a lot of corruption and incompetence in their armed forces, who aren't really that much of a menace and could be contained by far better methods than this.
Yes, and that's an interesting point in itself. So where does this go, though? Do you think that that you know, Zelensky's basically saying, I'm not going to accept anything that involves me giving up any land whatsoever? I mean, we take you back to 2014 again, where nobody did anything when they went into Crimea from Russia. Do you see this ending with Russia gaining part of Ukraine?
Well, I think it looks as if it's inevitable. I've never recommended or urged or supported that. I don't think people should gain by invasions. But what does it matter what I think? If this war is to end, then it seems to me to be quite likely that the Russians will actually, because of the relatively strong, and I say relatively strong, not globally strong, the relatively strong position they're in, might be quite likely to hang on to those parts of Ukraine which they've seized. I think a lot of Ukrainians, particularly the nationalists in the West, would privately be quite glad to see the back of these areas, because they're full of people who are, in many cases, Russian speakers and look still towards Moscow and aren't ever likely to fully engage in the very nationalist Ukraine these people want to create. But that's another issue which people need to consider in this. What has been going on in Ukraine itself and what its political balance is. Zelensky, I don't think, could conceivably agree peace on those terms. If he did, he'd be, I think, immediately removed and be replaced by somebody much more militant. So he can't do that. It's always been the problem with these negotiations that whatever happens, whichever way it goes, one of the leaders will have to go. Putin, I think, has reached a stage where it's going to be quite likely that it isn't going to be him who goes, because he's gained and held this land, and because Donald Trump has now broken the stalemate and made it quite clear that he doesn't really mind how unjust a settlement is if it ends the war. Yeah. And that is quite plainly his view. He's not interested in any kind of justice here. He just wants to bring it to an end, and as a result, he appears as it were to have chosen a side, and that will mean, it seems to me quite likely that Russia will hold on to the territories that it has gained by illegal force. Well, no one can be glad about that. But then again, I keep asking people, how did this start? Was it necessary to start it? Who's really to blame? And I say that it's certainly not as simple as so many people make out. And we are absolutely not seeing a rerun of Europe in 1938, 1939, and 1940. This whole crisis began, as people forget, with Russia withdrawing from huge areas of both Central Europe and Central Asia, not particularly out of principle or niceness, because Russia had become, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, too weak to hold on to these territories.
Yeah.
And it remains too weak. I keep pointing out that the gross domestic product of Russia is smaller than that of Italy. We're not dealing here with a great economic giant that can. It still has nuclear weapons, which makes certain kinds of war against it very difficult. This is why the Americans and indeed other NATO members have never directly, openly engaged in the Ukraine war, because if they did so, that would take on a path which might lead to nuclear confrontation. So that is one of the difficulties in this war. They could never do that. The fighting had to be done by Ukraine as a proxy. And Ukraine was used by the Americans as a battering ram. And now they've given up battering Russia. They're laying aside their battering ram. And those who took part in the battering, I'm afraid, are going to find themselves alone and quite possibly abandoned, as many, many other American allies from Vietnam to Afghanistan have discovered.
Absolutely right. And they do it in a very unusually cold manner. It does have to be said.
I don't decry that. Great powers behave like that. That's what they do.
Yeah.
If they don't do that, they don't survive.
No, quite. Let me ask you just one final question before we let you go. You got a piece in the mail today about Lucy Letby, saying you understand why many people find the idea that she's innocent offensive, but we have to accept that our police and courts can make terrible mistakes. They do, and continue to do so, don't they?
They do indeed. But I do think I'm reaching out here a bit to those people who continue to believe that Miss Letby is guilty. I understand why they do so. I myself was totally wrong about the Birmingham 6 for many years, something I greatly regret. But for the same reasons, it's very, very hard to accept that your justice system isn't working properly and can sometimes produce terrible, unjust results. It unsettles your entire life. If your justice system is at fault, then really it's quite difficult to live a good moral life, isn't it? If you can't believe in these institutions, if you can't believe the police are fair, and if you can't believe the courts are fair, then everything else begins to crumble. I understand that. But I think in the end, you have to accept that even in a good justice system, and by comparison with most of the world, I have to say ours is still pretty good. Even in a good justice system, mistakes are made. And it strengthens that justice system to acknowledge those mistakes. And I do ask those people who still think that Miss Letby is guilty to look very much at the Shu Li report and the evidence that has come out and will follow, and to reconsider, because there doesn't seem to me to be any good purpose to be achieved by keeping this young woman in prison when there has never been an adequate case against her, and she's not been convicted beyond reasonable doubt.
Okay. Good to talk to you, Peter. Thank you very much indeed. As ever, you've got a column in the Mail today about that, of course. It's on page 24. Lucy Letby, who he believes very much deserves. He's never said that she's innocent. He just thinks that she should have another trial. It's coming up to 8:20. Next, and we're going to speak to Ashley Armstrong, business editor at The Sun. She's got a big piece on page 10 of the paper today about the problem with growth in this country and why Rachel Reeves can't just make it magically happen. This is Talk.
So it didn't take much for people to say, hang on, you're just recycling here. It's not good enough. But quite apart from the fact it's unforgivably woke, it's also just lame and pathetic.
And I assume by extension, boring.
Yeah, you just got that deja vu feeling every time you switched it on. Say, well, what's he nicked this storyline from? Well, it's just one of his old Channel 4 dramas.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 23 minutes past 8. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock, of course. I've got this from Gooddeep, who says, morning, Mike. If you look at the footage of the hostages being released and look at the people of Gaza, they don't look starved, malnutritioned, they don't look like they need help, they are suffering or displaced. Looking at those footages, they're all cheering and rejoicing with Hamas. They are the supporters of Hamas. Yeah, it's a pretty unedifying and pretty ghastly scene that you can see there, displaying the coffins of children and their mother in front of a sort of cheering crowd. It really is quite remarkably awful. We're going to talk to Rear Admiral Chris Parry, former NATO commander, coming up a little while, about what the situation is regarding the Russian peace talks. But first, let's talk about the state of our economy, because yesterday we broke the news on this show that inflation had reached 3%, the highest level in 10 months. And this morning in The Sun, Ashley Armstrong, business editor, has written a great piece on page 10 on the subject of that, saying, sorry, Chancellor, just chanting the word growth won't make it magically happen. I fear that you're absolutely right. Ashley, very good morning to you.
Hi, morning. Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you too. I mean, you must be about as tired as I am of hearing Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves saying, you know, this is why we're putting money back in people's pockets, working people will be better off.
Exactly.
They keep saying it as if it's true when it clearly isn't.
I know, it's exactly that. I mean, we kind of thought in that run-up to them winning the election, they were talking about growth, the Chancellor was talking about growth was the answer. And then you thought, oh, there's got to be a plan.
Yeah.
And there hasn't really been until kind of the other week when there was the growth speech and it was a lot of rehashed ideas. The problem is that at the same time, we've talked about before that massive budget that was a huge blow on business, which actually kind of then led to that falsehood of the Chancellor saying that, you know, it wasn't a tax raid, it was keeping national insurance exactly where it was. And I think every man and woman in the street could see that wasn't true when it came to kind of their job prospects, the country's finances. And then yesterday's inflation figures kind of really were another blow, because we've got that horrible risk of stagflation now, where we've got inflation creeping back a bit higher, largely due to the things that Downing Street has done in the budget, and zero to little growth, 0.1.
And just tell us what stagflation means, because a lot of people will hear that word and they see it written in headlines, but they kind of go, what does it mean?
Totally, and it is that kind of like jargon thing that I think people feel mystified about, but it's actually quite simple. It's stagnating economy. It's sort of the portmanteau of the meshing of words. So you get the stagnating economy when you're trundling along at this, you know, hardly kind of eyebrow-raising 0.1% growth, and then mixed with inflation and the rate of price rises kind of going up. So that kind of horrible, nasty mix, because it's the worst of all worlds. You know, if you do have a growing economy, then generally people and businesses can afford higher prices because things are going gangbusters.
Right.
That's not here.
It's really not. And I mean, some commentators have fallen for it as well, haven't they? Because I remember last week when we had the growth figure that came out, 0.1%, and some people were actually saying, oh, some good news for Rachel Reeves. You're kind of going, well, how's it good news? It's 0.1%.
Well, it was good news because in a way that it wasn't recession. I mean, well, you're clutching at straws,
But you almost wonder whether they're just kind of slightly tickling it up a little bit to make sure it's not a recession. So technically speaking, it's not a recession, but you're only really, 0.2 away from it.
Yeah, and I think that is right. I think that there is a bit of nervousness going around. So after the budget, there was lots of anger in business, right? And then a few months down the line, it's quite interesting. Some of those bigger names have actually got very quiet. And it's because there's a genuine worry in the city and in business that if they keep talking down the economy, if it keeps being kind of trumpeted up as, yes, we're a bit of a basket case and look at what the government's done, then actually it impacts them, because international investors think, oh, the UK... oh, it's in a mess again, or it's not growing, or it's another reason not to invest. And that kind of affects their own share prices. So it's this self-interest, actually, of, let's not talk it down too much. But right. I think we should be honest about our prospects.
Well, it's a bit late, isn't it, to start suddenly being truthful, because there haven't been really much up to now. So it could be a whole new meaning of the government for them. But I mean, I'm reading a report this morning as well from the British Retail Consortium and Opinion, which says the confidence index stands at -37. I don't know what that means, but it doesn't sound good. This means that consumer confidence has plunged to yet another new low.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And I think that is right. And it's actually that kind of the consumer that is going to be affected by the budget as exactly that kind of lower income household, or that household that actually required flexible work to get back into the workforce. And so if you are in one of these jobs, you're probably most nervous because your company and firm has already been signalling these staffing costs we can't afford, we're going to have to make some changes.
Yeah, exactly right. And also we got news this week that next week the energy price cap is going to go up yet again by £85. I think that's the third rise since Labour have got in after the fact that they promised to freeze the energy price cap. So that's going to put prices up as well, isn't it? It's going to put suppliers' prices up. It's going to put food prices up. It's going to put all deliveries up. Everything's going to go up again.
Yeah, well, the off-gen price cap is on the household bill front, but I mean, businesses also kind of have been loudly complaining that the UK is already stuck with the highest electricity prices in the world, and it's not going to come down. And actually, Cornwall Insights, the analyst that made that price cap forecast just this week, they said, you know, actually that huge drive for that clean power push isn't going to bring down bills in the short term either. So actually, there needs to be a bit more help for those households rather than this very expensive push when nobody else is making the same dash.
Right. And is Rachel Reeves still looking at some kind of financial statement in March?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, what's going to be in it is more of a guesswork. It's going to be, but yes, yeah. I think there's definitely something that's going to be coming, and a lot will depend on how much of the government budget she can slash on her own.
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, there's talk this morning in the Times of £5 billion being slashed from the welfare budget, which sounds ambitious and is ambitious. I don't know where they're going to find that from, and it's going to be pretty tough. So, especially when they want to give another £4.5 billion to Ukraine.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, that kind of defence is going to become a much more political and bigger issue on that, you know, kind of how do you get that? And it's interesting, isn't it? Because when you start talking about those small percentages, but it's a real signal, especially to the rest of the world, about, you know, how we are taking defence seriously. So I think Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer will be definitely under pressure to be sending a bigger signal. You know, foreign governments don't necessarily care so much how much we spend on welfare. They do on defence.
Yeah, absolutely right. Ashley, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Ashley Armstrong there, business editor at The Sun. Big piece in The Sun today on page 10. It just shows you what UK inflation was doing. You might remember when it rose all that way up to sort of nearly 11%, just over 11% back in sort of 2022, 23, and then it's come back down into 24. At the beginning of the year, it was down around 4%, and then it kind of dropped down below 3% in the last kind of 10 months, basically, and now it's going back up again. A picture of Rachel Reeves looking rather alarmed. I think she should be. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call us on. Send us a voice note. We'd be very happy to hear from you. Alan in Middlesbrough says this: I agree with Peter Hitchens about Trump being a disruptor, and I believe Trump's goal is to pile pressure on European leaders to take remedial action to end the conflict beyond just throwing good money after bad. It's obvious now that the US will not fund a cash cow war, and it exposes how weak the leadership is in Europe, with few exceptions. I think that's right. And Ian says, Mike, 3% inflation at a time we had a 0.1% GDP growth. In my thinking, you net the effect and have 2.9% negative change. Woo! As you say. It's not good, is it? I don't know where they're going to find growth either. I really don't. I just don't think that they've got a clue as to how to make the economy grow, because everything they're doing seems to be basically having the opposite effect. And in fact, a big piece in the Mail today suggesting that the tax raid on private schools for VAT has had the complete opposite effect to the one that they were expecting. Rather than raising a load of money, what it's done is put a lot more cost and strain on the state school system, because many, many private school students, pupils, whatever you wish to call them, are not any longer going to private schools. Their parents can't afford to send them there because of the VAT increase. So now, instead, state schools are having to sort of have the burden of finding places for all of these children. They don't have the places, so they're having to bus them or taxi them to other schools which are much, much further away from where they live. So the whole thing is an absolute disaster. We could have told them that, of course, and in fact we did tell them that. 0344 499 1000 is the number. Coming up, we're going to speak to Rear Admiral Chris Parry, former NATO commander. We'll get his take on what's going on right now in Ukraine, what Zelensky's saying, what Donald Trump is saying, what J.D. Vance is saying, what Putin is saying, where it's all going. We'll really need a very, very considered view from the Rear Admiral. We'll get it coming next.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 8:34. I'm Mike Graham. John in Lincolnshire says, if I can identify as a teenage boy or a llama, then surely it should be OK to identify as a solicitor. Or did Reynolds simply confuse solicitor with soliciting? It's an easy mistake apparently made by many MPs over the years. Yes, I see what you did there, John in Lincolnshire. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, I mean, I still think that Mr Reynolds is in a pretty bad place. The business secretary, he's a secretary of state, he's in the cabinet, he's supposed to be a fine, upstanding individual. He's not supposed to tell lies about what he's done in his past. He's not supposed to make up jobs that he might have done to polish his CV and make it look as if he's a bit more clever than he actually is. It's also an offence, by the way. We heard from our resident resident solicitor, Harjap Singh, who basically said, yeah, it's a crime. He's breached the law by pretending to be a solicitor. It's against the law. It may not be a particularly serious breach, but it's still a breach. So how can he still remain as a cabinet minister? We'll come back to that story, Jonathan Reynolds, because we've got a clip of him actually admitting that he was a solicitor, wrongly admitting it, telling the story in Parliament. So he's misled Parliament as well. Let's talk to Rear Admiral Chris Parry, former NATO commander, of course, a man that's very much to be relied upon for a sensible view. Chris, a very good morning to you. Welcome.
Good morning, Mike.
Good to see you. I mean, there's so much to discuss, I suppose, this morning. I mean, I'm kind of glossing over to an extent some of the nonsense that Donald Trump has come out with on the basis that some of it, even he probably knows is nonsense. He's saying it for an effect. He's calling Zelensky a dictator. He's possibly demanding that he's saying he should have had elections. He must have a new election. I'm less interested in that, really, more than I'm interested in the end game and what is going to likely be the end game and what you think is plausible, possible and acceptable.
Well, Mike, I think one of the things that the Trump administration has done is actually state some hard realities here.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty obvious that Ukraine can't get its conquered territories back from Russia. It doesn't have the military power or potential to do that.
Right.
The other thing is the United States and indeed Europe can't stay in there forever.
Yeah.
You can't commit the same level of finance and military support that we did to Afghanistan, for example, over 20 years. So there are some hard realities that have come in here. I agree with you that I think President Trump is throwing out all sorts of outrageous suggestions. He's done this before.
Yeah.
We saw it during his first presidency. He shows you something with his right hand. He says something outrageous. Meanwhile, the left hand is actually getting things done.
Yeah.
There's also, he's playing Putin's disinformation game as well, putting out there loads of stuff to confuse everybody. I'm sure Putin and his advisors right now are going, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah.
So, you know, at the end of the day, your point is well made. You know, what's going to happen at the end? You know, I'm in the business of strategic forecasting, Mike, and I can tell you the chances of us having a European force or any sort of force in Ukraine that's going to deter another war are negligible.
Yeah.
One other sort of agenda item that the Americans will want is they won't want Chinese peacekeepers in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Because that will give them a foothold in the country and make it a Chinese protectorate. So that's a big agenda item for the Americans.
Yeah.
How do I see it going in future? I think Ukraine will have to be like Finland in 1939-40. It's going to have to declare neutrality. It's going to have to arm itself to the teeth, and it must never, ever give up its claims to that lost territory.
So presumably they don't join NATO under that plan then?
There's no way that a hostile, a state that's actually being combated by a hostile other state, especially a large state like Russia, can join NATO. It's a complete liability for the rest of us. I've never thought membership of NATO is a good idea. I think, you know, NATO guaranteeing whatever future borders are agreed, it might be a good idea. But again, that would drag in the Europeans and the United States. And I'm afraid to say every single military solution that I've seen that involves the Europeans falls on the fact that we just don't have the military power or sustainability to be there. The Russians know that. And there's nothing that Russia would like better than to be able to provoke some sort of incident that enables them to take on European powers without the United States.
Yeah. So in some ways, Putin has won then, has he?
Well, it depends what winning is. I mean, if all the sanctions are lifted, Russia's role as an international pariah is removed, then, yeah, he will have won. The fact of life is that Russia has misbehaved. It's got to pay reparations, I think, for the damage that it's done. I think there's got to be some adjustment over the territorial land grabbing that has taken place. But you know, Russia throughout its history has said, we wish to dominate the Black Sea and also the Baltic. So they're never going to give up Crimea. They might give up the two central provinces, Zaporizhia, Mykolaiv, places like that. They won't give up, I don't think, the Donbass and Luhansk, that bridge that takes them through to Crimea. Originally, I thought that they wanted the whole bottom third of Ukraine, all the way through to Odessa and Moldova. I still think that's the case. And whatever we put in place, then we're going to have a situation where he can't do that in future.
Yeah.
But, you know, as I said, I think the only solution to this is Ukraine says, OK, we get it. We're neutral. There won't be NATO troops on our spot. And let's face it, Mike, if we put European peacekeepers in there, they're NATO troops. So,
right.
You know, it doesn't matter what flag you put them under. They're still NATO troops, and Putin won't like it. But then you've got to have sufficient deterrent forces within Ukraine to stop any further aggression. We've got to arm them to the teeth. Now, a little bit of me theoretically says, well, actually, if that's the case, Ukraine needs nuclear weapons.
Wow. Let's look at what...
which he used to have.
Yeah. Let's look at Dan Crenshaw. He's an American congressman. He's here in London for a couple of events. He was talking to Harry Cole from The Sun yesterday. Here's his take on it.
And I would understand a lot of the hand-wringing if people hadn't seen him in action for 4 years, but we already saw him in action for 4 years. NATO didn't fall apart. That 4 years was built strengthening Ukrainian defenses, not the opposite. That 4 years was spent on action. Did he say nice things about Putin that made people mad? Yes. Did he do a lot of things against Russia, more than his predecessor ever had? Oh yeah. We killed a bunch of Russians in Syria, no problem. I mean, you know, we put additional sanctions on Russia. There was a number of things. Back when I was having this argument like 5 years ago, it's been a while, but I had like 6 things that I would repeat, and it was these were not nothing. I mean,
the biggest expulsion of Russian spies and diplomats after.
Right. I mean, he takes pretty hard actions against Russia. So this is a strategy we should be more optimistic about.
That's Dan Crenshaw there with an interesting take on Trump and Russia. He's a former Navy SEAL. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's quite an interesting character.
This is me. You know, I can't disagree with any of that. You know, I think people need to read the art of the deal.
Yeah.
Trump very clearly says, while I'm distracting you with something outrageous, I will do something behind your back.
Right.
And, you know, he hasn't changed, and he's doing it again. We've got to look at what's on the table, see what's acceptable to Ukraine and also to the rest of Europe, because there's no doubt that Putin, if he thinks he can dominate the rest of Eastern and Western Europe, he's going to do it. I suspect if Ukraine gets settled, we're going to see a real pressure coming on the Baltic states and also on Sweden and Finland for daring to join NATO. As I said, the real priorities for Russia are to dominate and neutralise any threat that they think is coming from the Baltic and the Black Sea.
Right, and they seem to have done that rather cleverly. And I mean, is it true what J.D. Vance said as well, that Europe has been caught napping? They haven't really been looking after their defensive realms. They haven't been looking after their defence budgets. They haven't been paying attention to the right things. And instead, they've allowed mass migration to completely take over the continent. They've allowed ridiculous government spending to increase on things like civil services, and bigger government, and you know, Putin has just literally run rings around them.
Right, Mike, it's worse than that. Between 2006 and 2008, I was in charge of future forecasting in the Ministry of Defence.
Yeah,
I was saying we've got a real problem from uncontrolled migration from North Africa and the Middle East. I said it in a public speech at the Royal United Services Institute. Number 2 threat, a returning Russia. Number 3 threat, a rising China. And I'm afraid to say I was disciplined by the then Secretary of State for saying that, and also by my own bosses who said this is scaremongering, this is alarmist, and so forth. But I said, hang on, I'm in charge of future forecasting for you, and you're telling me I can't say it.
Yeah, you don't like the future, you know, change it, right?
Well, yeah, shape it, exactly. But, you know, we were saying, you know, what's that? You know, 2008, we were saying, the major threat to Europe and the UK is uncontrolled migration from North Africa and the Middle East, way before it became popular, and also the issue with Russia and China. And I'm afraid to say, in a country that's governed by electoral politics instead of strategy, you are always going to have these problems. And I'm afraid the 20th century lesson for most politicians is, if we make a mistake, if we get it wrong, we'll always have time to be able to rectify it before the enemy gets his act together. Well, that's not how war works, particularly in relation to a superpower like Russia.
Yeah, and that's exactly how it's played out. I wish we'd known that. I wish I'd known you back then as well, because I could have somehow amplified it. But there we are. Rear Admiral Chris Parry, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed, former NATO commander and predictor of what was coming. And nobody listened. In fact, worse than that, they didn't want him to say it. Isn't that typical of where the rot began? 2008. Now, who was in charge then? Let me think. Oh, I know. It was Labour, wasn't it? Let's get a voice note from Sue.
Morning, Mike. Sue from Farnham. As for Donald Trump, all these things he's saying he's going to do, whether he does them or not, he's certainly woken the world up. I love him. I like people that are out there saying what it is, not liars.
Yep, absolutely right. Sue, thank you very much indeed for that. One here from Chris. He says, morning, Mike. Come on. The old asylum seeker saying he's only 16. He knows most who check them can't tell the difference between a man or a woman. So they play on this, knowing they're dealing with total idiots and will get in with ease. We are a woke joke. Absolutely right. And on the subject of Jonathan Reynolds, here's one from John in Rugby. Morning, Mike. I'm surprised that Reynolds hasn't stated that his pupillage was under Horace Rumpole of number 3 Equity Court. Indeed. And Gary says, so Rachel from accounts is coming after our savings next. Will be pensions after that, no doubt. Clothes banks will be shutting soon because the only thing left to take will be the clothes off our backs. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, there's some suggestion, although it's being denied in other quarters, that Rachel Reeves is looking at ISAs and trying to limit the amount of money tax-free that people can put into them. At the moment, you can put in $20,000 a year. She's possibly saying that it should go down to $4,000 so that people will put more money into the stock market. Well, people don't want to put money into the stock market because it's a bit unsafe. And the reason they put money into ISAs is because it's guaranteed. And that's why they like it. So if you start taking things like that away, God help the country and the economy. It'll be absolutely dreadful. Coming up, we're going to talk about more woke madness. Fiona McAnina is here, Director of Campaigns at Sex Matters. Folk dancing is in the firing line, would you believe? Apparently, we should drop terms like ladies and gentlemen to avoid offending minority genders. Yeah, OK then. It's 8:47.
And what happened in the case of the market crisis of 2022, the Bank of England have since admitted it was their fault. They've admitted that 2/3 of all of that market movement was down to their failure to regulate pensions. But they were successfully blamed it on me. And as you know, Alex, we've got a very supine mainstream media in this country. They spend a lot of their time being briefed and leaked to by the permanent bureaucracy. They spend a lot of the Bank of England have since admitted it was their fault.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's coming up to 10 minutes to 9. Can't believe the time goes so quickly. I mean, we're in Thursday already. We're going to be Friday. You know, at the end of next week, it's going to be March, for heaven's sake. It seems hard to believe that things are going so quickly. Zoe in Lancashire says, morning, Mike. This bloke said these migrants are homeless due to us sending arms across the world, etc. Well, why are these boats going across with young fighting men on them? Where are their families in all this? Living amounts, the rubble, laughable, absolute rubbish excuse. Well, this is the problem, isn't it? I mean, we hear all the time that the people coming to this country on the small boats are generally speaking young men. But we had a story just the other day of a couple from some foreign field who had sent their children unaccompanied on a small boat because I think the mother had fallen into the sea and the father jumped in after her. Anyway, they're now trying to come to this country on the basis that their children are now living here and they fear that they should be reunited with them. Well, that's all very well, but come off it. I mean, you can't have it both ways. If you want to send your children unaccompanied and put them in danger, that doesn't mean you automatically have the right to come and live with them, because then it would probably be something that everybody would do. This from Perry. If any of us lied in our CV, racked up £4,000 of unauthorised spending on a parliamentary credit card, crushed growth in the economy and were abysmal failures, we'd all be sacked. Yet Rachel Reeves and Jonathan Reynolds carry on as if nothing happened and continue to be referred to as right honourable. I know. Well, what you refer to people as, of course, is very important. I don't know whether right honourable is going to be there for much longer because it might be offensive to some people and their different genders. Because believe it or not, there's a story in the Telegraph today about folk dancing. Apparently, the English Folk Dance and Song Society is attempting to make centuries-old traditions more inclusive. Now, I don't know how much folk dancing you do or how much folk dancing you know about, but folk dancing apparently has been around for quite a long time. But apparently now we're being told that they should drop terms like ladies and gentlemen to avoid offending minority genders. Barn dances, ceilidh dances often have defined male and female roles. Apparently there's somebody who calls out things that you have to do, guides participants through complex steps using terms like men and women, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. You know, it sounds like the invitation to one of those old BBC shows, doesn't it? But apparently the Folk Dance Society aren't happy. So let's talk to a woman who's very sensible about these matters. Fiona McAnina, Director of Campaigns at Sex Matters. Fiona, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
I mean, this is a charity backed by the Arts Council, so I suppose we shouldn't be too surprised that they've suddenly thrown their collective kilts in the air, I don't know, wanting to make sure that gender-free language is used at all times. I mean, haven't they got anything better to do?
Well, we do know that the Arts Council's mad for this kind of thing. They think that it's progress. But I think there's a glimmer of good news in this, Mike, because if the English Folk Dance Society has latched onto this and started giving out pronoun advice, I think we're probably past peak pronoun. So,
I'm hoping so.
Maybe the tide is turning.
Yeah, I'm hoping so. I mean, we've seen what's happened in America with the whole DEI thing being completely deconstructed because big companies like Accenture, big companies like JP Morgan, Wall Street companies, Deloitte, the big accounting firm, they've basically just abandoned it all, haven't they? They've just gone, forget all this, diversity, equity and inclusion nonsense. We never really believed in it in the first place. And that's the most damning part for me, that these people who wanted to do it all and get your pronoun, I mean, Deloitte have now actually said to people, no more pronouns at the bottom of emails. And if they didn't believe in it, why were they so keen to do it?
Yeah, and it's very easy for them. It's trivial to them, pronouns, add them, take them away. They don't care. But I think there's a more serious problem behind this, because actually, for example, lots of local authorities, in trying to escape male and female references, they're actually converting changing rooms to be what they call gender neutral, which of course is mixed sex. And the evidence is that that is an open invitation for voyeurism, for covert filming with smartphones, and actually more sexual assaults happen in those changing rooms, of course. So, you know, those big organizations, they push EDI. To them, it doesn't really matter. They just take it out again. But other people are living with the consequences.
Is there a sense, I've got, I don't know whether you agree, that it's still being kind of promoted in this country by the public sector, not so much by the private sector, but more and more by the public sector only?
I think it's very embedded. You know, it's been written into policies. There's a big push, and it's been going on for years, and I think it will take a long time to get rid of it, and it will take some leadership. We need to see some confident leadership that says, sometimes in life, it matters whether you're male or female. There are consequences to that. There's no harm in saying so. It's not offensive to be called a man or a woman. Whether it's true or not, it's still not an insult.
No, I'm laughing. I'm laughing just because it seems so obvious that you shouldn't have to say it, you know?
Yeah. Well, and yet people have just swallowed this idea that it's somehow hurtful.
Yeah.
But, you know, if people want to call them, people can call themselves what they like, but the rest of us don't have to. And sometimes we just can't ignore it, whatever it might do to the person who's wanting to adopt a new identity. The rest of us have eyes, and sometimes we can't ignore them.
Well, it got so ridiculous, didn't it, that I think it was last week or the week before that we reported that the railways have now issued a new 134-page book of guidance or something, which tells you how you can refer to people. And one of the words that they say you shouldn't use is passengers. And I'm going, well, what do you call people on a train? Well, you can't call them that. I mean, looking at the guidelines here from the English Folk Dancing Society, couple apparently and partner might be bad to say, because some people might feel a bit uncomfortable. And also apparently they say, they actually write this down, right? If you ask someone to dance, you should be prepared to accept no as an answer without expecting an explanation.
Yes, in other words, be a grown-up.
Right. Yeah, I mean, also, I mean, don't they do discos at school anymore? I mean, I was 16, I think, when I went to my first disco, and there were plenty of times when I was asking girls to dance and they said no, and I didn't ask for an explanation. I just walked away disappointed and kind of slightly ashamed.
Well, I think, you know, these organizations act as if language is everything, as if the words you use somehow change the experience. So not calling them passengers will make us all more comfortable, or ignore the delays. Language does matter.
Yeah.
But it doesn't fix a bad experience, but it can conceal an important truth.
But there is this problem in this country that we now live in this world that we now live in. I've been banging on all week about a sign that I keep seeing everywhere I go, where something's being dug up, and it seems to be part of, you know, most of London is currently being dug up. And everywhere you look, there's a sign that says, considerate constructors. A member of the Considerate Constructors Alliance or something like this, and you go, well, you can't just say you're considerate. You're digging up a street, you're making it impossible for anybody to get down it, you're making it impossible for pedestrians to walk and cross the street they want. You're not considerate. You're not considerate just because you make a sign that says you're considerate.
Well, that's the irony of language. Sometimes it changes reality, and sometimes it really doesn't change reality, and that's why we have to be able to hold on to and speak the truth.
Yeah. Here's another top tip. Participants should also avoid touching other dancers unnecessarily, according to the guidelines. Well, again, surely you would know that, wouldn't you?
Well, presumably, if you don't want to touch anyone and don't want to be touched, you probably shouldn't go ceilidh dancing.
Yeah, but I was thinking more in terms of touching the person that you're maybe not dancing with. I mean, I don't know. It seems to be an absolute nightmare. But there we are. Listen, Fiona, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Fiona McAnina, Director of Campaigns at Sex Matters. Hard to believe that you have to come up with this stuff, right? But here we are. In this day and age, having to explain why, ladies and gentlemen, might not be a good thing. You might want to describe anybody as that. Have we got a voice note? Yes, we have. Dan has got a song for us.
Morning, Mike. Great show as usual. Here's a little song about Mr. Belinsky. Well, I'm a king of the tappers. My name is Vilensky. US gave us lots, but now it's stopped, and that's what's bothering me. Oh, shooby-doo, I want more of you. I want pounds of you, dollars of you. Ho, boo, ho. Have a great day, Mike.
Thank you very much indeed. I think we've now reached peak voice notary. It's very good, isn't it? Keep them coming. We love them here. 0344 499 1000. We have a bit of a surprise for you coming up in a few days' time as well. We'll let you know more about that as it happens. Ian in Somerset says, morning, Mike. I'm so pleased we have such a capable and intelligent politicians running our country. Just wondering if their plan is to send the UK into bankruptcy and hope to get a fresh start after paying the court 500 quid to do so. Very right, indeed. And Fred says, morning, Mike, yet another $1.5 billion to Ukraine. Who are they to us? Where's this extra money coming from? Ah, yes, the ISA tax rate. This is just beyond fathomable now. I mean, it really is quite extraordinary what is going on in this country and how people have lost their collective minds. The lefties in particular going absolutely barking mad about what Donald Trump is doing and what Donald Trump is saying, as if the most important thing in the world is not some kind of a peace deal to end the war and to end the killing in Ukraine. Surely that is the point of the whole thing, isn't it? This is Morning Glory, back after the news.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened. I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. The shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, or far ball, slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No. There's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia. These are the missiles that Biden has approved for the use by Ukraine.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. Coming up to 3 minutes past 9. I'm Mike Graham, into the final hour of the show. 4 glorious hours every single weekday morning, of course. And here we are. It's Thursday already, February the 20th. I don't know where the time is going. We're going to be in March soon, another week or so, and that'll be it. The Ides will be chiming and coming up to probably haunt Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer this morning on the front page of The Times saying basically that Zelensky is no dictator. Yeah, well, thanks for that. We knew that. Just because Donald Trump said it doesn't make it true. People are getting their collective knickers in a hell of a twist, though, about what Donald Trump has been saying, not just overnight, but throughout the course of the day, saying that he's made a hell of a mess of his country, and if you're not careful, he'll lose it altogether, needs to have more elections, you know, obviously he didn't have any during the war, etc., etc., etc. I've been much more interested, really, in where this is all going, rather than clutching my pearls and worrying about whether or not Donald Trump is saying things which are beneath him, which some people think he's doing. And I'm certainly not going to sit here and agree with him that Vladimir Putin did not invade Russia, did not start the war, and is not an actual dictator himself, because that would be entirely stupid and idiotic. John Rentoul's here. I'm not sure he's going to agree with me once again as well, to tell me what is going on. But what is really going on inside the Labour Party is what I want to talk to John about, because Keir Starmer's off to America very shortly. Now, he said earlier in the week that he wanted to be a bridge between the United States and Europe. Well, right now, the way things are looking, I'm not sure Donald Trump needs a bridge to Europe, because he doesn't want to go there anymore. It's as simple as that. 0344 499 1000 is the number. Also, let's talk about Jonathan Reynolds, who's still apparently the Secretary of State for Business, despite the fact that he was told off by the Solicitors Regulatory Authority and told you must stop calling yourself a solicitor, because, quite frankly, you are not. And we had a solicitor on earlier who said and agreed with me that this is indeed a criminal offence. Robert Jenrick thinks it is. They think in the Tory party that he should resign, and surely he must. I'm going to give him till Friday to do it. 0344 499 1000. Also, comedy on prescription for mental health patients. High-vis jackets that don't work. They don't make you visible, they make you invisible. And why Rachel Reeves is still very much in trouble over the economy. This is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. Chris in Ottershaw says this. Good morning, Mike. Surely lying about being a solicitor is much more serious an offence than eating a piece of cake during the pandemic. So Jonathan Reynolds must go, or Labour will yet again demonstrate their hypocrisy. Well, certainly there are those who've already said to me this, on the show this morning, that he's already on the higher level than somebody like Lou Haig was, and she went very, very quickly, or indeed Tulip Sadiq. All she did was get investigated for corruption. This guy actually pretended to be a solicitor. Blimey. John Rentoul is here, though. Very good morning, John.
Good morning, Mike.
Now, I suppose decorum would suggest that we must start with the Russian situation and Ukraine and Donald Trump. We'll get to Jonathan Reynolds in a bit. But I mean, I'm looking at some of your tweets, and you're like me, interested in how Labour deals with all of this. There's a great piece by Alistair Heath in the Telegraph today, which basically says if Starmer really wanted to rearm Britain and do the right thing, he would ditch net zero, he would ditch all of his crazy budget-cutting policies with Rachel Reeves, and he would start spending loads of money on building up our arms and our defences. But of course, he's not going to do that, is he?
Well, it's the Labour Party's got a real problem with Keir Starmer's rhetoric, certainly. Yeah. I mean, he's talking about how Europe has to step up and spend more, and agreeing with Donald Trump, actually, that Europe needs to spend more on defence. And yet he won't even commit himself to a date for his target, which is to get defence spending up to 2.5% of national income. Right.
Which everybody now agrees isn't enough anyway.
Well, absolutely. Well, I don't know if everybody agrees that. I mean, there would be a lot of people in the Labour Party who would quietly not agree with that.
What, you mean the appeasers, as they're known?
I think, well, I think people are entitled to make a reasonable point, which is how much money does Ukraine actually need?
No, I've been making that point.
Why don't we start from that end of the discussion? How much money does Ukraine need in order to hold the line against Vladimir Putin? And then let's see how we can pay for it. I mean, instead of setting this arbitrary target for a share of GDP, let's work out what we actually need.
Yeah,
I think it might be
right.
more than 2.5%. It might be less. Might be more than 3%. Who knows?
Yes, or in fact, it might be nothing, because people are fed up with paying for a war which appears to be going nowhere. And one of the things that I think Donald Trump's been quite good at pointing out is that where is all this money actually going? And I'm not suggesting that, you know, it's being spent on, you know, lavish homes in the south of France or, you know, fleets of Mercedes or anything like that. But, you know, the money does seem to be given without very much of a sort of accountancy being made of it. And at the end of the day, if people want stronger security in Europe, perhaps rather than sending them $4.5 billion, which Starmer's promised to do, you know, we spend $4.5 billion on our own defences.
Well, no, I think it is in the national interest to stand up to Putin's aggression.
Yeah, but for how long, though?
He won't stop in the Ukraine. Well, the point is they're holding the line in Ukraine.
Not really.
So
they've already lost a load of ground. I remember talking to Rear Admiral Chris Parry, who's a very estimable character, used to be NATO commander, and he's basically said the game's up. You know, he said there's nothing really that Ukraine can do unless you want to go in there with a NATO force, which of course we don't want to do. You know, the one thing that we must do is then settle on some kind of peace deal, which will eventually mean, I'm afraid, that Putin gets a bit of what he wants.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've got this mad theory that Donald Trump is actually engaged in quite a clever negotiating tactic, which is to tell the deluded, paranoid narcissist Vladimir Putin what he wants to hear,
right?
So that Putin can listen to Trump telling him what a great bloke he is and how he's won the war, and then just sign on whatever deal is put in front of him. I mean, I think. You know, that's
no, I think you're absolutely right.
Of what Donald Trump is up to.
Absolutely, and don't tell any of your lefty mates, because they're too busy getting their knickers in a twist about how terrible Donald Trump is, what an awful man he is, and how he's selling us all down.
Well, he is. He's a terrible.
Well, I mean, I don't really take a view on whether he's a terrible man. Most politicians are terrible men. Keir Starmer's a terrible man as well. Even Tony Blair had his faults. I know you won't want to admit that.
No, I don't think. I don't think
Gordon Brown.
No, the point about Trump is that the American people voted for him.
Yeah, exactly. And he is. Well, the other point is he is actually the 47th president of the United States of America, which happens still to be the leader of the free world. And so, but we also know that he's a very, shall we say, unpredictable character. I think he knows exactly what he's doing. Like you, I agree that he's got a plan. And I wish that people in this country and in Europe would stop, you know, clutching their pearls and actually get on with doing the things that he says they should have been doing years ago.
Yeah, no, I mean, if he's able to con Vladimir Putin into thinking that he's secured a victory when he hasn't, then I'm all for it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
exactly what I think. I've never actually put it in those words, but you're quite right. I think that's exactly what's going on, and I think all of the rest of it is just a distraction, to be honest.
Well, exactly, and everybody and the entire world is joining in helping with the distraction by clutching their pearls, as you say.
Yeah.
And what a shocking thing it is that Donald Trump's saying, which only reinforces Putin's satisfaction that he's getting his way. And you know, if that works, then I think the world should breathe a sigh of relief.
Absolutely right. So down to the main question of the day then, what does Keir Starmer say to Donald Trump when he goes into the White House, which I think is next week, early next week, or maybe a little bit later on?
Yeah.
What's he? I mean, I mean, he probably doesn't even know at this point. They're probably scrambling around trying to figure out what to do, because they're trying to work out what Donald Trump wants him to say.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know that Donald Trump is very interested in what Keir Starmer say anyway.
No.
Be blunt.
Clearly not.
But I mean, so Keir Starmer's got to try and get his attention, and I think the only way to do that is to say, yes, I agree with you, Donald. Europe has to spend more on defence, and I'm planning to do that.
Right.
In the UK, he doesn't need to be specific about that, because Donald Trump probably doesn't know the details. But I mean, imagine that is going to be the gist of his message.
And I think as well, this idea that he wants to be a bridge between Donald Trump and Europe is also now redundant, because it's clear that Donald Trump is not interested in a bridge to Europe. Well, you know, he's quite happy just popping in every now and again on a plane and flying back out again.
Yeah, no, Keir Starmer is a bridge to nowhere, I think.
Yes, I think that's a very, very true statement. What about, let's talk about the internal workings of the economy as well, because more bad news yesterday for Rachel Rees, 3% inflation. A piece of The Sun today from their business editor saying you can't just keep saying we're going to produce growth and it suddenly happens by magic. It's clearly not happening. Other commentators this morning are saying it's actually one of the contributors to the inflation is the VAT on private schools. Another one will be coming next month or so. When the national insurance rate goes up. You know, energy prices going up again next week as well. You know, it's not looking that great for her, is it?
It's not looking at all good. I mean, some of the forecasts of the economy are okay. There seems to be quite a divergence between forecasters. I think the National Institute for Economic and I've forgotten what they're called, but NIESR has got quite a buoyant forecast of the economy. But no, you're right, and I think her real problem is that if defence spending is going to have to rise over the long term, and if she can't actually get the welfare bill down, then the lack of growth is really going to cause problems. And we don't know what the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility, they've given her the first draft of their forecast, which is going to be published next month, and presumably that's not good news. It's going to require some kind of spending cuts or tax rises, and things are going into a there's a danger that things go into a downward spiral.
Yeah, and I was interested to read, I think, over the weekend, your piece in which you declared that you might have been wrong in the past to say that if she gets the heave-ho, it will reflect badly on Keir Starmer, therefore it won't happen. Because of all this nonsense...
where I was wrong... sorry, hang on a minute, Mike.
What?
No, I said that Keir Starmer's not going to sack her because he disagrees with her economic policy, because it's his as well. I mean, if she has to go because, there's further revelations about her embellishing her CV, which I don't think is very likely. But I mean, if those kind of stories keep dripping out and she has to go, then I think there's an interesting question about who replaces her and so on. I mean, I don't think Keir Starmer's going to sack her. No,
but I thought that I read, and maybe I misinterpreted your words. I thought that I read that you said that there was now a much bigger chance, which you never thought there was before, that she would go on the basis that now there's another reason she would go, which is kind of what I'm guessing. I'm coming up a rather long way around it. But at the end of the day, because with somebody like her, I mean, everywhere you look, there's a bit of an exaggeration. She then, it was only the other day, the Who's Who references were wrong. She claimed to write for some esteemed organ, which she's never written for.
Well, she left out the word European in the title of a
right. Yeah, but the trouble is...
of a journal that she wrote for. But yeah, no, I mean, you're right.
Well, that's like me saying I wrote for the financial...
of that nature,
right.
And if they're more serious, then you could see that she would have to go.
But it's like me saying I write for the Financial Times, not the Hindustan Times or something. I mean, it's and what about, Jonathan Reynolds? Come on. Yeah. Let me play you the clip, because it's such a good clip to play. We don't always have such comedy gold on this show, but he basically is another one who says, "Oh yes, it was something my staff dreamed up and put on my my LinkedIn profile." Well, here's him actually inside of the House of Commons saying this.
Before the last election, I worked as a solicitor in Manchester city centre, and I would travel in to Manchester every day from what is now my constituency.
I mean, why would you say it if it's not true?
Well, it's interesting. I hadn't actually seen that clip, but worked as a solicitor is it's a vague phrase, isn't it? Because being a trained solicitor is working as a solicitor.
No,
isn't
it's not. It's working. It's training to be a solicitor, I would say. You're a wordsmith, John. You would not describe somebody who's a trainee solicitor as a solicitor.
No, but I might say they were working as a solicitor. I mean, I think that's. It's a grey area there.
I think
he just about gets away with it.
No, he doesn't. No, Luke Johnson tweeted last night that he sat next to him at a dinner one night in which he waxed lyrical about how he enjoyed his work as a solicitor when he worked as a solicitor. And there's plenty of evidence to say that he was also told by the regulatory authority to stop claiming that he was a solicitor, and he has now.
He hasn't claimed he was a solicitor for some time, has he?
Well, no. I mean, it was on his all of his personal information literally until last month, when he was told by the regulatory authority to remove it.
Right.
And he started claiming it in 2010. So you can't defend this one.
No, I'm not defending it, but I don't think it's a resignation matter.
Well, it's a crime, actually, is what it is. Because I spoke to a solicitor this morning and I asked him whether it was a crime. He said, yes, it is. It's a crime to impersonate or pretend to be a solicitor. According to Robert Jenrick, it's a prima facie breach of the Solicitors Act of 1974 and the Legal Services Act of 2007. It's a criminal offence to pretend to be. It's much worse than sort of exaggerating your role at the Bank of England, because it's a proper, you know, job.
But again, it's exaggerating your role, isn't it? Because he was a trainee solicitor.
Yeah, but a trainee solicitor can't do conveyancing on your house, can he?
No, but I mean, but why does any of this matter? I mean, he's an MP.
Well, because he's told lies, and he's continued to tell them. Well, surely that's important, isn't it?
Well, I think it's important, and I think he's corrected the record. I don't think he was making any serious claims to have been a solicitor.
He was.
He
said it in various places. It was on his CV. It was on his parliamentary form when he filled it out, and that's on record as well. It was on all sorts of other pieces of paper. He's tweeted about the fact that he worked as a solicitor. He said it in Parliament. I mean, what would you want?
I want some evidence that he's actually gained from it. I mean, it'd be interesting to know what he said to.
Well, maybe some people voted for him because they thought, oh, he's an important man. He's trained as a solicitor. That's important. That's
he has trained as a solicitor, Mike. So
well, no, he didn't finish it though.
You are dancing on the head of a pin.
No, he didn't finish it though. He didn't finish training. Also,
no, but so what?
So what? Okay, well, so what? So what if Rachel Reeves pretended that she was an economist at HBOS? So what if Rachel Reeves...
well, she was an economist at the Bank of England.
No, she was, yeah, but it was a very lowly...
I don't think that matters. I mean, it obviously matters.
Does it matter? Does it matter that she plagiarised somebody else's book? Does that matter?
Yes, of course. It was the wrong thing to do, but it's not a resignation offence.
Okay. Does it matter that she said she was a chess champion when she came 26th?
Well, I haven't looked into the details. Right. She did win some. She won something.
No, she came 26th.
No. She came top of.
No, she didn't.
She came joint top of some other competition.
No, she didn't. I don't really care, but you know, don't claim things that aren't true. I mean, I don't go around telling people that I've climbed Everest, or you know, I used to be in a rock band in the 80s. You know. It's a very odd way to comport yourself, it seems to me. And considering that we've had Lou Haig, who had to resign as a result of being a convicted fraudster that she apparently hadn't told anybody about. We've got Tulip Sadiq, who's had to resign because she's involved in the corruption investigation in Bangladesh. And we've got Andrew Gwynn, who's had to go because of things that he said on WhatsApp about voters. You know, we've got Rachel Reeves telling constant lies about what she did. And now we've got yet another one, Jonathan Reynolds. You know, I think that there's a body of work here from these Labour politicians, which seems to me to suggest that they can't tell the truth.
No, but no, the list you've just read out, Mike, makes the case that all these examples are different, and they have to be judged according to their, according to the individual cases.
Yes.
And
well, some would say that the three people who have had to leave the cabinet have had to leave on less stringent grounds than this one.
I don't buy that. I think I think those were more serious offences, and Jonathan Reynolds and Rachel Reeves are less serious.
Right.
So
you can't.
I think the situation is broadly as it should be.
Well, let's say standards in public life have fallen dramatically. Then,
no, that's absolutely not right, Mike. I mean, people have had to resign. And there have been controversies about people not resigning over minor.
I mean, Peter Mandelson resigned over less important things than this. Sure.
No, I don't think that's right.
You think what? You think that if Peter Mandelson had pretended to be a solicitor, he'd have been all right, and they would have just kept him there? I really don't think so. I think Tony Blair would have got rid of him.
Well, there was.
I think he's going to go. By the way, I think he's going to go. Reynolds.
Who? Jonathan Reynolds.
There's a reshuffle coming. If he hasn't gone by the end of this week, I predict that he'll be out in the reshuffle.
Right. Well, we'll see when the reshuffle is. I mean, that may not be until
what are you
May
hearing?
or June.
Oh, you don't think it's going to be sooner than that?
No.
I don't know. I think desperation will make it possible.
It would look terrible.
But it already looks terrible, though. Everything looks terrible. That's the problem.
Well, everything always looks terrible to you, Mike. Well, no, I think a reshuffle would look weak if it was much more
But look at how quickly you've changed your mind. I mean, 2 weeks ago you said to me Rachel Reeves would look terrible if she was forced out. Now you're foreseeing
well, it would
that
look
it could
terrible
happen.
if she was forced out. Yes.
Yes, but now you're foreseeing a situation that it could happen, though.
Well, only because of the the drip of news stories.
Yeah, but that's it, isn't it? Events, dear boy, and all that. I mean, times change, things get worse.
Well, that's why I changed my mind, as you said.
Excellent. Listen, that's quite an agreeable conversation for us, that, John. Thank you very much indeed. Chief political commentator at The Independent. We'll see you soon. Who knows when the next reshuffle will be? Of course it will look terrible. Everything Keir Starmer does looks terrible. And there you heard it from John Rentoul, the voice of reason from the left, the Labour Party spokesperson, if you like. He says basically Donald Trump's not that interested in seeing Keir Starmer, and he's certainly even less interested in what he's got to say. I think that says it all. Brilliant, isn't it? What a great leader we have here in the United Kingdom. I'm a little confused, says Tracy and Bromley. Russia has had many years building their military, then they invaded Ukraine but haven't managed to beat the Ukrainians. How and why on earth would they invade another country next, like most of our politicians are telling me? I'm not buying it. Well, as Peter Hitchens said, which of these truths is actually true? Who can say? It's 9:23.
Some breaking news this morning revealed that under the Terrorist Act, 242 people were arrested in the year to June of this year.
As something you can indulge in as to all the people who aren't going to prison because, well, there's no prison spaces.
So this is a talk exclusive we've been looking at.
I said, you take these cuffs off me and speak to me like a human being rather than a common criminal.
You're just left wondering, do these people who lead us actually hate Britain? Yeah. Do they not love our country and everything that we've stood for?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 25 minutes past 9. I'm Mike Graham, and with you, of course, all the way through until 10. Alex Phillips is in for Julie Hartley-Brewer. Coming up, Brian says this: why should we or any other country expect the USA to fund NATO and shore up our defence when we don't finance our own share? I'm sick to death of our government throwing money around that we don't have. I've had it with this country. It is the pits, and this government is plunging us ever deeper into the hole. I can't really argue with that. And they're spending ridiculous amounts of money. I mean, we learned this week, for instance, from The Sun, from Harry Cole's stories, that there's something like £23 billion pounds going south. Some of it in foreign aid, some of it in awards made by some other dodgy kind of, a charitable arm of the government to all sorts of weird things like, prawn investigations in Bangladesh inclusivity studies in the Congo, all sorts of bizarre grants to groups all over the world for doing very strange and woke things. Let's talk now to Alex Wilson, who is, of course, Reform UK's London Assembly member. He's got some things to say about it, because over in America, Elon Musk is absolutely slicing through red tape, slicing through bureaucracy, slicing through ridiculous payments that have been made in hundreds of billions of dollars to really, really strange causes and very odd sort of projects around the world, including, as Donald Trump revealed yesterday, $100 million worth of condoms to Gaza. I don't know what's going on. Alex can tell us that we're doing the same probably. Alex, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
Good to see you. I mean, Doge is absolutely the most impressive operation, I think, that I've ever seen inside of any government organisation. It's very clear, obviously, that it's not a government organisation now because Elon Musk is running it. We need something similar here, don't we?
Yeah, it's precisely because it's not directly a government organisation that it has the kind of freedom and the opportunity to do exactly what needs to be done. I mean, look, where there is government, there is waste. That's a time-honoured maxim. It is impossible for government to spend, well, it's impossible for anyone to spend a huge amount of money without there being some efficiencies that can be got. But government in particular, public sector, doesn't feel properly accountable for the way that it spends money. It doesn't spend money in the same way as you or I would spend our own personal budgets and have to make sure that we're very careful about every penny we spend. So having an external body that's separate from government, that's not staffed by public sector bureaucrats, but instead led by figures who've got real experience of making efficiencies, making savings, cutting out waste in the private sector. Ultimately, the politicians will have to decide what recommendations do and don't go ahead. Yeah. But fundamentally, the way of identifying huge opportunities for savings, because every major government is living beyond its means, and the same here in this country. We've talked about having years of austerity. Well, throughout the years of austerity, most people probably don't realise that even then, government was still spending more than it was raising in revenue. So there has to be a serious look at doing this. And public sector bodies like the National Audit Office haven't cut the mustard.
No.
So Doge in America with Musk at its head creates an interesting model, interesting precedent. Let's see how they get on, and if it does deliver real meaningful savings, then it's certainly something we should consider doing here.
Well, according to what they're telling everyone, they claim they're saving about $4 billion a day. Even if you consider that their economy is obviously much bigger than ours is, and you reduce that, say, by, I don't know, a tenth or something like that, you'd still be saving an awful lot of money, millions and millions of pounds a day. Absolutely right. And we know, I mean, just from the last weeks sort of peeking around inside some of these organisations, because you can see it's quite readily available. It doesn't often take an awful lot of hard investigations to find where this government money's going. There's an awful lot of it available simply online. You just have to look it up and know where to look. But there's millions and millions of pounds being spent willy-nilly, even by local councils. I mean, we found out just the other day, for example, I know this is not perhaps what you might call a waste of time altogether, but certainly, installing heat pumps in people's homes for free who haven't asked for them, it seemed to me to be a bit of a frivolous waste of time and money, considering that most of the time they don't work, and most of the time the people who are in receipt of getting them aren't paying for them.
Absolutely. I mean, net zero and the spending associated with that is probably the biggest example that we could find over here, where huge amounts of money are being wasted by central government, by local government, and here in London by the mayor and the GLA. I mean, we've got our final budget meeting next week. We've been looking at some of the figures, and we've worked out that in total, if you add up across all the budget lines, then this year, assuming the budget's approved, which it will be, then this year we'll be spending £1.4 billion on net zero and climate-related things across the GLA family. And that's a larger amount of money than Sadiq is trumpeting as the biggest ever police budget, about £1.1 billion. So you can see what the priorities are. It's wrong. But there's got to be opportunities to strip out some of that waste, that bloat, and get it back either into frontline public services, putting police on the streets, improving security at tube stations, that kind of thing, or giving it back to the people who raised it in the first place, the taxpayers, you and I, who go out and work hard, try and earn a living and pay for it all.
Well, how about a council tax rebate once in a while for people? I mean, the other thing that spends an awful lot of money of ours is Transport for London. You know, I was talking to a driver the other day who said that everybody who drives in London, whether it be in a black cab or in any kind of, you know, hire car, whether it be Uber or something else, you have to supposedly go and take an English test at the headquarters of Transport for London, or do it over Zoom or something like that, which means they've got to employ a load of people to give people English tests. This particular guy was telling me, you know, he said, you know, the ridiculous part is the person giving me the test wasn't English. I am English, and they gave me 93%. I said afterwards, well, what's the 7% that I didn't get? You know, I'm actually, you know, I can speak English fine, it's not a problem. But, you know, that kind of thing, which, you know, as soon as any bureaucrat gets their hands on something like that, they spend 10 times as much money on it as the private sector would.
Yeah, I mean, the principle of having you know, basic standards of English, I think, is a good one and absolutely necessary. You know, for people who are driving people around, you know, potentially, you know, very, you know, vulnerable people. You need to be a level of security and safety. But you're right, even you know, things like that, the way that things are administered by the public sector, it automatically, you know, print a whole load of extra zeros at the invoice. So that's how it works. And there's got to be cheaper and more efficient and better ways of doing it. Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, I dare I say it, I mean, it seems to me that if Reform got into power, they would cut through in a similar way that Elon Musk is doing. They'd appoint somebody who would just be involved in looking into everything that doesn't need to be spent, presumably. You know, Richard Tice has got pretty good experience of business, as has Rupert Lowe. You know, they'd probably find somebody who just come in and sort it out. Yeah, I mean, in our we didn't call it manifesto, we called it our contract with the people for the general election last year. We had a very clear pledge in there that we wanted every public, or every spending manager in the public sector was going to be instructed to identify £5 in every 100 for their budget that could be saved without impacting on frontline services. So that sets the benchmark for, you know, finding those savings. And you know, whether that would be done internally or whether if the Doge model works in America, you know, having some kind of external body that can really scrutinise and get to grips with it, because if the public sector is struggling to mark its own homework, one way or another, there are savings to be made. And you're absolutely right, a reform government would definitely want to do that, because ultimately we need to recognise and respect every penny that government spends. It's not government money, it's taxpayers' money. It's you and I that have worked hard to earn that, and it's only right and proper that it's spent accurately, efficiently, and it is diverted. It is spent and focused on frontline services that we all rely on, and shouldn't be bloated public sector waste. No, absolutely right. I mean, I paid my tax bill last month, and it was pretty bleeding painful, I can tell you. You know, I don't mind giving them the money as long as they don't waste it. I mean, can you imagine what it would look like down at Whitehall if you locked out all of the people that work in the Home Office and said, we're only going to let you back in if you can prove you're doing an efficient job? You'd probably lose about 85% of them. Be fantastic. I would look forward to that day. Good to see you, Alex. Thank you very much indeed. Alex Wilson, Reform UK's London Assembly member. Let's get a voice note from Joe on Ladies and Gentlemen.
Hello, Mike. How about this? If they want to ban ladies and gentlemen, maybe we should start by introducing like this. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and other fairy tale creatures. That way we get everyone covered. Great show.
Yeah, there'll be somebody who says you haven't covered them, though. There will be. Joe, thank you very much indeed. Now, talking of money, Donald Trump was speaking last night in Miami, made some very, very good points. He spoke for a very long time, by the way. I had to sort of put it off, otherwise I wouldn't have got any sleep at all. But here he is, talking about saving money on Doge, but also Fort Knox is in play.
We're going to go into Fort Knox to make sure the gold is there. Are they going to? You know that we're going to go into Fort Knox. Do you know about that? That was a bad bump.
Are they going to eliminate more national security positions, civilians there?
We'll see what happens. But one of the things we do want to look, I mean, we hope everything's fine with Fort Knox, but we're going to go to Fort Knox, the fabled Fort Knox, to make sure the gold is there.
Where would the gold have gone?
If the gold isn't there, we're going to be very upset.
Let's hope the gold is still there. I mean, you can't stop watching him, can you, really? John from the Isle of Cole says, this morning, Mike, this guy who's OK with Reeves and Reynolds' CV is exactly my issue with a lot of you. He writes an article that if I read, I'm supposed to accept its authenticity, yet he then comes on your show and says nothing to see here regarding MPs lying. I said to you before, UK politics is my new form of comedy, and now it's coming from journalists. Crack on. I like a laugh. Yeah, I mean, it is from some journalists. I hope you don't lump me in with that. I mean, I'll make you laugh, all right, but not because of the ridiculous things I say, because of the things that I say that are true. And here's another thing that's true. You can win some money. Check this out. It's competition time, and we're giving you a chance to win a whopping £25,000. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 36 minutes past 9. Martin says this, Mike, talk about bigging yourself up. I used to be a logistical distribution engineer, which on paper was a lorry driver. Yeah, I'm not up with this, ridiculous new lexicon that people want to introduce. It's like when they talk about sacking people now, they talk about reducing the head count. Really? Why don't you just say what you mean? We're going to sack some people. We're going to make a load of people redundant. No. We're going to reduce the head count. It doesn't make it any easier to tell people that, does it? Coming up, though, we're going to talk to Mo Lovett, producer of Battle of Ideas, because that's a big and great festival that takes place every year. I'm not sure if we're coming around to it soon, but it's all about free speech, and this is a conversation we're going to have about Islamophobia and the definition of it, because if Angela Rayner gets her way, and we know why she wants to, they'll have a definition which will pretty much bring a blasphemy act in by the back door, which I don't think any sensible or sane person in this world wants. We'll talk about that coming next right here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's Mike Graham here with you until 10 o'clock. Alex Phillips will be along to take you through for the next 3 hours after that. One from Annie. Excellent show as usual. Nothing will happen to the business secretary because if Starmer gets rid of him, he'll have to get rid of Reeves as well. And Rogers says, Mike, it's funny how Keir Starmer is ever so concerned about protecting Ukraine's borders, yet by letting thousands of illegal migrants into our shores, doesn't give a stuff about our borders. I know, it is funny, isn't it? It's tragic, actually. It's not funny at all, but it doesn't appear to be making any inroads into his brain. Maybe he should be watching what John Rentoul said, though, on the view that basically Keir Starmer doesn't give a stuff what he thinks. Sorry, not Keir Starmer. Donald Trump doesn't give a stuff what Keir Starmer thinks. In the end, he doesn't care if he goes to see him or not, which all happens next week. Let's talk to Mo Lovett, though, producer at the Battle of Ideas, and talk about Islamophobia, because there's a lot of people in the Labour Party who want to get a definition that we can all apparently adhere to, so that you could be warned and you could be told that you're Islamophobic officially under the law. I think it's very dangerous. I'm pretty sure Mo might agree with me. Mo, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. How are you?
Yeah, very well indeed. Good to see you. A blasphemy law through the back door is what Cammy Badenoch calls it. I think she's right, isn't she?
She's absolutely right. I mean, we formally abolished our blasphemy laws in 2018, and this looks like very much like the Labour Party want to reintroduce them by the back door through the definition of Islamophobia, which they want to create a criminal offence about, and also hate speeches as well. So basically, the reason this is very worrying is because the Labour Party already have a code of conduct about Islamophobia, and we know already that it's so broad. It can include criticism of the religion, obviously, anything that's perceived to be of Muslimness. So things like saying, we have to be very clear, Mike. The law is there to protect people. It's there to protect property. It's not there to protect ideas. Ideas should never, ever be proscribed under law.
Right. And doesn't the problem here as well is the way that the law sometimes moves once it gets introduced in this country? It's like, you know, the victimhood sort of debate that people have. I remember when they brought in, I was living in Scotland at the time, and they brought in a sort of a race hate law, which meant that if you punched somebody in a pub, without calling them a name, but if you before that you called them a name and called them an English so-and-so, suddenly it was a race hate crime more than it was just an assault. And it all came down to the person who was the assaultee, if you like. If they thought they'd been the victim of a race hate crime, they could report it. And so you, whether or not you were being racially offensive, were really part of the conversation. You were just charged with it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. This government seems to have, or our political class seem to have a complete problem with differentiating between speech and action.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're punching somebody, setting fire to a mosque. These are all criminal offences.
Right.
Criticising ideas, or criticising what we say, it's very worrying for free speech.
Right.
And like I say, we know that the writing's on the wall. And one thing you have to say for Kemi Badenoch, she does actually see this stuff coming down the pipeline in the way some of her Tory predecessors have not.
Right.
She understands that this is a real rolling back of some of those Enlightenment ideas around freedom, democracy, rule of law, free speech. All of these things are being curled back with this government that just has no respect for democracy, the rule of law, free speech.
And isn't it also slightly disturbing that many of the kind of the places where this stuff ends up in courtrooms are sort of run by people who seem to have all come out of the same box? You know, Lord Hermer's kind of little students, if you like, you know, these human rights lawyers, people who sit on judging panels for immigration tribunals, people who sit in judgment in Crown courts. You know, they've all got this kind of lefty bent, it seems to me, where they're desperate to protect everybody, apart from, you know, sort of British citizens who just want to go about their lawful daily business and say pretty much what they want.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it before, haven't we? The religion of woke that's infested our public institutions and our universities. You know, there are so many sort of urban myths or campus myths that go around about, you know, the racism of the working class and how we need to curb what people say and, you know, that will solve the problem. And here's the thing about blasphemy laws, Mike, is in countries where they do have blasphemy laws, they have a lot higher rate of religious intolerance and religious violence than those countries that don't. We need to defend our principles, which are free speech, the freedom to criticise ideas, including any religion, and make it a crime to set fire to mosques, to attack someone.
Right.
These you can convict people for, but not speech. We have to be really careful about that.
Yes, I'm assuming they've probably got a blasphemy law in Iran, which also happens to be the only other country in the world where they allow members of their clergy to sit in on parliamentary business, which is what we do in the House of Lords. So, you know, I'm not too sure that's a good example either.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the one thing you've got to say to these people who think that you can combat racism or you can combat anti-Muslim hate, can't, okay?
No.
We do that far better as a society without the law getting involved. We do it far better by making certain views unacceptable, in polite company or whatever, but not in law, because people have to have the right to think through ideas, to think through what they think, to be able to criticise. And, they're so poor-faced as well, because they say any stereotypes. I mean, what will that do for comedy?
Right.
The prescribed comedy for people who have got mental health problems. The comedy is just deadened in this country. You can see it because people are so frightened to speak publicly and to explore ideas.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the only person that says anything now without fear or favour is Ricky Gervais, because he's like, I'm too big to be cancelled. And he is. But, I was saying this earlier, can you imagine this NHS kind of comedy routine where they're going to hire only woke comedians so as not to offend anyone? I said, you're not exactly going to turn up for your NHS therapy session with Jim Davidson, are you?
Or, you think about Monty Python or, all of those people that have, made a career out of, being funny about religion and religious ideas. Ideas have to be poked fun at, they have to be criticised, they have to be debated. They're just ideas. They're belief systems. Okay, they're important to some people, but they're not important to others. And that's what it means to be tolerant and to live in a free society.
Yeah. Exactly right. Great to talk to you, Mo. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Mo Lovett there, producer of The Battle of Ideas. Very sensible woman. Yeah, this idea that we need a law to protect Muslims, I mean, forget about it. You've got plenty of laws in this country to protect people from being attacked, from being, you know, put upon, for having their property damaged, all of that. If only the police were very good at actually prosecuting people for breaking the law, that would be one thing. What we don't need is more laws to be brought in, which will be affecting what you can say and what you can't say. That is very clearly not what we need here. Here's one from Winston who says, morning, Mike. As Reynolds has actually stated verbally that he's a solicitor, he can't now blame some other poor bugger for typing it. I now expect the full force of the law to come down on him. Anything else would just be two-tier. Absolutely right. And David says, morning, Mike. Yes. Very funny. I was thinking this headline long ago. It is indeed, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Any in-betweens in the audience, I'm afraid, should not matter to such people if they are that open anyway. Just no, says David. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Coming up, we'll hear some more from Peter Hitchens and what he said to me a little bit earlier about Russia, Trump and Putin. Plus, we'll take a couple of your calls as well. It's 9:47. This is Morning Glory.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's 9:49. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through for another 10 minutes, effectively. And then, of course, Friday is on the horizon. Tomorrow, not only do you get 4 more glorious hours of Morning Glory and some gaffs, you'll also get, of course, Plank of the Week, which we'll tell you all about coming up tomorrow. Let's have a listen to Peter Hitchens, though. We talked to him a little bit earlier on about his take on the madness swirling around currently. Ukraine, Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump, and the whole shebang. Here's what he had to say. Everybody can see what Donald Trump is doing. The question is he doing something that will work, I suppose?
Well, we know, don't we, that he likes to do these disruptive things. Yeah. He might equally well have said that he wanted to turn Crimea into a world holiday resort run by himself. Right. It would have the same effect of just making people follow his agenda in what comes, because now he's disrupted totally the idea that Volodymyr Zelensky is a sort of new Churchill by calling him a dictator. I mean, even though he obviously is not a dictator, in fact, rather the reverse. Poor old Zelensky has for some time been a manipulated puppet of much more powerful forces in Ukraine. Remember Volodymyr Zelensky was elected as a peace president and tried, to his great credit, for some time to achieve peace, and was completely frustrated by forces in his own country, including his predecessor, Petro Poroshenko, and the ultra-nationalists. So to call him a dictator is obviously absurd. He isn't that. And it's not unreasonable for a country in the middle of being invaded to suspend elections. As has been many times pointed out, this country suspended elections during the Second World War. That's not unusual or particularly bad. But just what Trump has done is he's started people thinking about, well, obviously Zelensky is not a dictator, but what exactly is he? And what has Ukraine been doing to achieve peace over the past several years? And how did this combat originate? What he can't say, or won't say, or perhaps doesn't know, and referring here to President Trump, is that this war was really ultimately the creation of an American decision to push NATO relentlessly eastwards, despite the repeated warnings of Russia that they weren't ultimately prepared to tolerate this. People will, I have to add here, people will now say, oh, you're excusing the Russian invasion. I'm not. The Russian invasion was not just unlawful, stupid, but also morally wrong, and has covered Ukraine in blood.
Peter Hitchens there talking about the situation regarding the war in Ukraine, of which there is much bluster and much ridiculousness being spoken about. We'll get to the bottom of that, I'm sure, over the course of the next few days and weeks. Alex Phillips is coming in just before 10 to tell us what's going on. Let's get a couple of quick calls in. Morris is in Bridgend first up. Morris, very good morning to you.
Thank you very much, Mike, for taking my call. Pleasure to speak to you, mate.
Good to talk to you, sir. What can I do for you?
We were on holiday last year, and I'm not going to say the name of it was in Greece.
Right.
We got speaking to two young girls from Ukraine, and as what everybody else might have said to them, sorry to what's going on in your country and all this, and President Zelensky, he's standing up for you. We were shocked, for them to turn around and say to us, he's not a good man. Because we only hear what the BBC are telling us, the polished turd company. So we heard that, he persecutes his own people if they don't go and fight.
Right.
And their words to us were, we don't hate the Russian people and they don't hate us. It's between Putin and Zelensky, it's them. So when it comes down to what we see, I think people are just led by the BBC by the nose.
Yes.
And
also by our politicians. I mean, there hasn't been any politician really in this country who's questioned the business of war in Ukraine, apart from the Reform guys.
Yeah, well, because we've got no experienced people to actually do that. Like, all we've got is ex-councillors who got into Parliament, just want to feather their own pockets.
And also they love the idea of being these international statesmen. I mean, look at David Lamb, he's flying around all over the world, charging us £1 million for a private jet. To do what exactly? So he can get some nice pictures for his album. Oh,
well, yeah, of course. The country's in a state, Mike. My advice would be to any youngster, if you get a chance, get out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I take the opposite view, Morris, but I take your point, and I know a lot of people feel like you do. My attitude is to stay here and make it better, which I think we can all do. Nick's in London. Hi, Nick.
Good morning, Michael. I hope you're well.
Yeah, I'm not bad. What can I do for you?
Thank you. You were talking earlier about government spaffing our money up at the wall on various ridiculous things, including foreign aid, and it is awful. But it's not that they're spending spare money; they're actually borrowing money to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, the UK debt is a goodness knows what. And they're still spaffing money up at the wall on vanity schemes around the world. And it's not just their money. They're not borrowing it personally. Rachel Reeves isn't doing it. It's ours.
Exactly.
And it's our children. They're writing IOUs that our children and grandchildren will have to pay back.
Yeah.
It's morally indefensible.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I'm sick to death of hearing from them saying what we're going to do with this money, that money, billions here, billions there. I mean, you're promising $4.5 billion to Ukraine. It's madness. Nick, thanks for your call. Let's talk to Mike in St Albans. Mike, very good morning to you.
Hello there, Mike.
Good to talk to you. What do you want to say?
Well, basically, I think next week's trip to America by Farmer will probably be one of the quickest on record. I think the pilot would be lucky if he's got time for a cup of coffee. I could see Trump telling him to get back to the mess he calls the UK, and cough up with his 2.5 for his NATO contribution.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, it really is quite remarkable, isn't it, that Keir Starmer thinks he can have any influence whatsoever.
Oh, he overestimates his importance, mate.
Yeah.
I don't think he's not liked in Europe. He's not liked in America.
No, he's not liked in Britain either.
You're quite right.
He's not liked anywhere. Mike in St Albans, thank you very much indeed. This is the problem. You know, we've got a leader who people in Britain despise. He's got one of the lowest approval ratings of all time, of any Prime Minister ever, never mind one he's only been in for about 8 months. He's not liked by the Trump administration. They think he's a bit too woke and he's probably a bit too useless. The Europeans don't like him either. God knows why, it doesn't really matter. This one from Reg on woke comedians. He says, woke comedians telling jokes to people with depression will only make it worse, won't it? And Jenny in Oxford says, Mike, Trump says he's going to Fort Knox to see if the gold is still there. Whether it is or not, he has to say it is, as it is the basis of their currency. He has to protect the dollar. Well, I think he'll tell us if there isn't any gold there, but I'm pretty sure there will be some. Alex Phillips is here. Very good morning to you.
Good morning. I've got the gold. Look at this.
You have got the gold.
Shining gold
Very nice.
today.
Absolutely. Feeling gold, are you? Feeling like a gold winner?
No, I'm not feeling like a gold winner at all. I'm feeling very anti-gold. I'm feeling, I don't know, I'm so, this blimmin' Trump thing, the Trump-Putin, you know, MAGA has been so great, right, so far, with its doging, with its closing the borders, with the positive message. I was like, this is the political revolution we need. And actually, even in part of this, J.D. Vance pointing his finger at European leaders saying, you're the problem, all true. These are things that need to happen and conversations that need to be had. But I don't know, like, you know, I think Zelensky's got a point when he's like, Trump's in a bit of a Russian disinformation bubble.
Yeah, well, how about the theory, though, that I was espousing, or John Rentoul actually espoused to me, that he's actually conning everybody here. He's conning Putin as well, making Putin think he's going to give him everything he wants, making Putin think that he's going to get the deal of the century, and then maybe it doesn't turn out like that.
Yeah, well, I think that's also, you know, something that's got to be borne in mind.
Yeah.
But, you know, and the other thing is we have beatified Ukraine in all of this because we have such sort of basic tropes, don't we, when it comes to media and politics. Russia bad, Ukraine therefore wonderful.
It's really not that simple.
It isn't that simple. No. But, you know, at the end of the day, who is the aggressor? Putin went into Ukraine.
Yeah, no doubt.
He's a monster.
No doubt.
You know, and I'm not hearing that being acknowledged. But at the same time, like he said, if he was going to get something, extract something out of Putin, if he turned around and said, oh, God, he's a monster, he needs to be stopped, and then says, OK, let's do a deal.
You see how
it's
Trump
done.
works. I mean, I don't know if you saw much of that interview with Sean Hannity the other night with him and Elon Musk. And Hannity says, you know, I don't understand you guys. You're sitting here like your blood brothers. You know, you just got $10 million from him. He's working for you for nothing. As Trump sued X, you know, for a bunch of money, which was before Elon Musk bought it. But Elon Musk's X have paid him out. You know, so you'd think they might be sworn enemies, but they're not, because that's how he works. You know, he takes people on, he makes enemies of them, he makes friends of them, he tickles them here, he shoots them over there. You know, that's how he rolls.
He went to meet that little